Our team recently received a story from a viewer that left us absolutely speechless. A tale of family betrayal so calculated, it's almost unbelievable. A woman named Olivia Powell was explicitly banned from her own family's Christmas celebration. Her father sent a message to the family group chat stating her poverty was contagious and would ruin the atmosphere for her younger sister's elite in-laws. Her sister Maddie piled on announcing they'd be dining at a 5-star restaurant where Olivia didn't belong. Olivia responded with just one word, "Okay." But what her family didn't know was that Olivia had already received a separate invitation, one that would change everything. That same evening, while her parents and sister celebrated at their exclusive dinner, they discovered Olivia was at an upscale hotel calmly sitting across from Maddie's fiancé, Ethan. The man who was supposed to unite their families was asking Olivia questions they desperately didn't want answered. What Olivia told us next about what happened in that hotel at the wedding that followed, and the secrets she uncovered about her mother's mysterious death 34 years ago, will leave you stunned. Here's her story in her own words. The night I received that phone call from my sister, I knew my family had finally made their biggest mistake. My name is Olivia Powell. I'm 36 years old and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in the city. I've spent the better part of my adult life building a quiet, independent existence, one that didn't require approval from the family that raised me, but never quite claimed me as their own. The night I received that phone call from my sister, I knew my family had finally made their biggest mistake. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks before Christmas. I'd just gotten home from work, kicked off my heels, and was heating up leftover pasta when my phone lit up with Maddie's name. I almost didn't answer. My younger sister and I weren't in the habit of casual phone calls. Our relationship had settled into something polite and distant years ago, maintained mostly through obligatory birthday texts and the occasional family event I was actually invited to. But something made me pick up. "Olivia, hi?" Her voice had that overly bright quality people use when they're about to deliver bad news, but want to sound cheerful about it. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I turned off the stove and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Sure, what's going on?" There was a pause, just long enough for me to register that this wasn't a spontaneous call. Maddie was choosing her words carefully, like someone who'd rehearsed what to say. "So, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas. You know, Ethan and I are getting married in the spring, and his family, they're really important people, Olivia. His father is on the board of Wright Holdings, and his mother chairs 3 different charitable foundations." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I'd learned over the years that silence was more powerful than questions. People fill silence by saying what they really mean. "Anyway," Maddie continued, her voice gaining a nervous edge. "His parents are coming to Christmas dinner this year. It's kind of a big deal, like the first official meeting of both families. And the thing is, we're doing it at Le Bernardin. You know, the French place downtown. It's beautiful, but the space is really limited. And with Ethan's parents and his sister and her husband plus Mom and Dad and us, it's already a full table." Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for me to make this easier for her. I didn't. "So what I'm saying is, and please don't take this the wrong way, but maybe this year with everything being so formal and, intimate, maybe it would be better if—" She trailed off. "Better if what Maddie—" My voice was calm, almost pleasant. I wasn't going to help her say it. "If maybe you sat this one out. Just this once. Next year will be different, I promise. It's just that this year is so important for Ethan's family to get the right impression, and you understand, right? You understand how these things work." I understood perfectly. I understood that my younger sister, who'd grown up in the same house I did, but somehow always had a room that got redecorated while mine stayed the same, who got a new car for her 16th birthday, while I was told to save up for my own, who was introduced at family functions as our daughter. While I was often just, Olivia was now making it official. I was being erased from the family portrait, and she wanted me to agree to it. "It's just not a good time," Maddie added, her voice almost pleading now. "You get that right." "Understood," I said. One word, flat, final. Maddie exhaled in relief. "Oh, good. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so reasonable about these things. I'll call you after the holidays, okay? Maybe we can grab coffee." We both knew that coffee date would never happen. I ended the call without saying goodbye and stood in my kitchen for a long moment, the phone still in my hand. I wasn't surprised. You can't be surprised by something you've seen coming your entire life. But I was done being reasonable. I walked to my laptop, opened it, and typed Ethan Wright Powell family into the search bar. The results populated immediately. Society pages from the city's lifestyle magazines, an engagement announcement from 3 months ago with a photo of Maddie and a handsome man in his late 30s, both of them holding champagne glasses and smiling at a charity gala. I clicked through article after article. There were photos of my parents, Robert and Helen Powell, beaming at various events described in captions as devoted parents to Maddie Powell, rising star in the city's art scene. Devoted parents to their daughter Maddie, singular. I took screenshots of everything, every article, every photo, every caption that erased me from the family tree. I created a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Evidence. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew this much: if they were going to make me invisible, I was going to document every instance of it. I was about to close the laptop when a new email notification popped up in the corner of my screen. The sender name made me freeze: Ethan Wright. The subject line read, "We should meet." I clicked it open, my heart beating faster. "Ms. Powell," it began, formal and professional. "I'm conducting standard background research before marriage, as is customary in my family. I've discovered certain inconsistencies regarding your family structure. I believe we should speak privately before the holidays. Would you be available this Thursday at 7 p.m.? I'll send the location if you agree. Regards, Ethan Wright." I read it 3 times, parsing every word. He'd found me. Somehow, despite my family's best efforts to pretend I didn't exist, Ethan Wright had done his homework and discovered the daughter the Powells never mentioned. And now he wanted to meet. Privately. Before the holidays. This changed everything. I didn't hesitate. I clicked reply and typed 3 words: "I'll be there." Thursday evening came faster than I expected. Ethan had sent the location within an hour of my reply: the Whitmore Hotel, a discreet, upscale establishment known more for its business clientele than its nightlife. The bar was tucked off the main lobby, the kind of place where deals were made over single malt whiskey and confidential conversations disappeared into leather upholstery. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock wearing a charcoal blazer and simple black dress. Professional composed nothing that suggested I was rattled. The hostess led me to a corner booth where Ethan Wright was already waiting. He stood as I approached, extending his hand in a gesture that was more boardroom than social. He was taller than he appeared in the engagement photos, mid-30s, with the kind of polished appearance that came from generational wealth. Expensive watch, perfectly tailored shirt, the ease of someone who'd never had to prove he belonged anywhere. "Ms. Powell," he said, his handshake firm and brief. "Thank you for coming." We sat, and before I could even glance at the menu, a waiter appeared with a glass of Chardonnay and placed it in front of me. I looked at Ethan, one eyebrow raised. "You mentioned in a LinkedIn article from 2 years ago that you preferred white wine," he said simply. "I did my research." That told me everything I needed to know about how thorough he'd been. He hadn't just found my name in some dusty records he'd studied me. Ethan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He folded his hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and said, "I need to understand why your family has removed you from their public narrative." No preamble, no pretense of concern for my feelings. This was business. I took a sip of the wine, it was good, and met his gaze steadily. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because my family has a protocol," he said, pulling the leather portfolio closer. "Before any marriage, we conduct discreet background checks on potential in-laws. It's standard practice when significant assets and reputations are involved. Nothing personal, just risk management." He opened the portfolio and slid several documents across the table. Property records, school enrollment forms from when I was 7, a copy of my birth certificate, my social security number partially redacted but clearly tied to Robert and Helen Powell as parents. "My investigator found all of this within 48 hours, Ethan continued, "which means your existence isn't exactly hidden, it's just deliberately ignored. When I asked your parents about their older daughter, they told me it was a clerical error from a brief previous marriage that ended before children. They were very convincing." I looked down at the birth certificate, seeing my mother's name typed in neat letters. Maria Chen Powell. A name I barely remembered but had spent years trying to learn about. The problem, Ethan said, his tone hardening, is that the documentation clearly shows you're 36 years old, which means you've been alive and erased for decades, not the result of some paperwork mistake. So either my investigator is incompetent, which I doubt considering what I pay him, or your parents are lying. And if they're lying about you, what else are they lying about? There it was, not concern for me, not outrage at my mistreatment, just cold calculation about what this meant for his family's exposure. I need to know before my family becomes legally and socially entangled with theirs, he said bluntly. What's the story here? I pushed the documents back across the table and leaned back in my seat. Before I answer that, I need to know a few things myself. What exactly do you know? What do you suspect? And more importantly, what are you willing to do with information once you have it? Ethan studied me for a moment, clearly recalibrating. He'd expected someone grateful for his attention, maybe desperate to tell her story. Instead, he was getting negotiation. I know you exist, and they pretend you don't. I suspect there's a reason beyond simple preference. As for what I'm willing to do, that depends on what you tell me. He paused. I haven't mentioned this meeting to Maddie or my parents yet. I wanted to assess the situation first. Smart. He was protecting his own position, keeping his options open. I could respect that even if I couldn't trust it. Here's what I'm offering, I said. I'll tell you what I know about why my family operates the way they do. But I need two things in return. First, access to your wedding guest list. Second, a guarantee that if I attend any family events related to this wedding, you won't undermine my presence or support any effort to remove me. Ethan's expression didn't change, but I saw him processing. That's a significant ask. It's a fair trade for information that could save your family from a very costly mistake. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed. But I need to be clear about something. I can't protect you if what you're alleging turns out to be unsubstantiated. If this is a personal grudge or exaggerated grievance, my loyalty will be to my family and Maddie. I don't need protection, I said evenly. I need witnesses. That seemed to satisfy him. He pulled out his phone, opened what looked like a shared document, and turned the screen toward me. The guest list. 214 people. Politicians, business leaders, philanthropists. Everyone who matters in this city will be there. Perfect. We talked for another hour. I didn't tell him everything, not about my mother, not about the suspicions I'd carried for years, but I gave him enough. The systematic exclusion. The financial disparity despite both of us being raised in the same household. The way I'd been written out of family history as if I'd never existed. Ethan took notes, asked pointed questions, and maintained that same detached, analytical demeanor throughout. When we finally stood to leave, he shook my hand again. I'll be in touch about next steps. And Ms. Powell, be careful. If your parents went to this much trouble to erase you, they won't appreciate you resurfacing. I was halfway to my car when my phone started buzzing. I pulled it out and saw the screen lighting up with notification after notification. 8 missed calls, all from Maddie. Somehow they already knew. I stared at my phone screen, watching it light up again with Maddie's name. The 9th call. I was still in the hotel parking lot, my hand on the car door handle. I let it ring 3 more times before I answered. What are you doing with Ethan? Maddie's voice was high and tight, no pretense of the careful politeness from our Tuesday conversation. He just texted me asking if I have an older sister. What did you tell him? I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, putting the phone on speaker. I met someone who asked about our family. I answered honestly. Honestly? What does that even mean? There was a muffled sound voices in the background. I could make out my father's low, commanding tone, though I couldn't hear the words. Maddie was being coached in real time. Olivia, listen, I don't know what you think you're doing, but Ethan is confused and asking all these weird questions about family history and... Did you tell him I don't exist? I asked, my voice calm. What? No, She was floundering now. That's not fair. You know the situation is complicated. Mom and Dad just thought it would be easier if I disappeared. That's not what I said. Her voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Why now everything was fine until... The phone was suddenly muffled, and when the voice came back, it wasn't Maddie's. "Olivia." My father's voice was ice, controlled. The tone he used when he was giving instructions to subordinates at Powell Industries not asking. "Come home. Now. This is not a conversation for phone calls." For 36 years, that voice had been the final word on everything in my life. When he said, "now," I had always complied. I'd come home when summoned, accepted his explanations, absorbed his disappointment, and made myself smaller to fit the space he'd allocated for me. "No," I said. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. "Excuse me." I said no, I'm not coming. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. "If you want to talk, we can do it over the phone, or not at all." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking as I started the car, but there was something else underneath the adrenaline, something that felt like relief. I'd said no. For the first time in my life, I'd refused a direct order from Robert Powell and didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't soften it with excuses. I didn't know it then, but while I was driving home, my family was having a very different conversation. I would piece together what happened later from things Maddie let slip from the coordinated response that followed from the surgical precision of their next moves. That night in the study of the house where I grew up, my father, Helen, and Maddie held a strategy session. There was no yelling, no panic. That's not how the Powells operated. Robert laid out the situation with the same detached analysis he brought to board meetings Ethan Wright had discovered I existed. The investigator had found documentation. The story they'd maintained for years that I was a clerical error, a ghost in the records, was no longer viable. Ethan was asking questions, and he was the kind of man who wouldn't stop until he had answers. Helen, always the strategist, suggested the pivot. They couldn't erase me anymore, so they would reframe me. I hadn't been excluded, I'd been protected. I was fragile, struggling with personal issues, unable to handle the pressure of their social circles. They'd kept me away out of love, out of concern for my well-being. It was a narrative that painted them as caring parents, and me as the unstable one. And then Robert made a phone call. Dr. Richard Zhao had been the family therapist I'd seen exactly 4 times when I was 16, right after I'd started asking too many questions about my mother. I barely remembered the sessions, just a kind older man in a comfortable office who'd asked about my feelings and my relationship with my family. The sessions had stopped abruptly when I'd apparently made sufficient progress. I'd always wondered if that was my decision or my father's. Dr. Zhao was retired now, but his license was still active. And apparently his loyalty to the Powell family was still intact. I learned about that phone call later, but I felt its effects almost immediately. The next morning, I woke to a text from Ethan. "My parents are hosting a pre-wedding dinner next Tuesday. They don't know about you yet. I'm inviting you. Let's see how your family reacts when they can't control the narrative." I stared at the message, understanding exactly what he was doing. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't him championing my cause. He was running an experiment, putting the Powells in a situation where they'd have to publicly acknowledge me or reveal themselves as liars in front of the Wrights. He wanted to see what they were hiding, and he was willing to use me as the catalyst. I didn't hesitate. I typed back, "I'll be there. Send me the details." This was my chance. Neutral territory, witnesses, a setting where my family couldn't simply exclude me without explanation, where their carefully constructed narrative would be tested in real time. I was still holding my phone, planning what to wear, what to say, when it buzzed with a new voicemail. I hadn't even heard it ring. I pressed play and heard Helen's voice, warm and concerned in that way that made your skin crawl, because you knew it was performance. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about your episode. Dr. Zhao called. He's worried about you." I played Helen's voicemail 3 times, analyzing every word like evidence in a deposition. Episode. That was the word she'd chosen. Not meeting, not conversation. Episode, a term that suggested instability, something medical, something that required concern rather than credibility. Dr. Zhao hadn't called her. I knew that with absolute certainty. I'd seen him 4 times 20 years ago for a total of maybe 3 hours. There was no therapeutic relationship to warrant a concerned call about my current mental state. This was a setup, and Helen's voicemail was the opening move. What I didn't know then, what I would only piece together later through fragments of conversations, and the too perfect coordination of what followed, was exactly how sophisticated their strategy had become. While I was preparing for Tuesday's dinner, my family was holding their own strategy session. Helen had laid out the plan with the precision of a military operation. They couldn't stop me from attending Ethan's family dinner. The invitation had come from him directly, and forcing the issue would only prove they were hiding something. But they could absolutely control how I was perceived when I walked through that door. The strategy had 3 layers each designed to undermine me before I even opened my mouth. First, they would arrive at the dinner radiating concerned parental love, carefully explaining that I'd always struggled with feeling less than in the family, that I sometimes created drama to get attention, that they'd tried so hard to include me. But I made it difficult. Second, they'd already positioned Dr. Zhao as a fail-safe. No forged documents, nothing illegal. Just a licensed therapist's professional opinion that I had a history of embellishing stories for sympathy. If challenged, Zhao could claim doctor-patient confidentiality while still confirming he'd treated me for emotional concerns. And third and most insidious, they would publicly offer to pay for me to get help, positioning themselves as caring parents supporting a troubled adult child. Every move was calculated so that anything I said would sound like confirmation of their narrative. But Robert didn't stop there. He made 2 phone calls that week, both carefully casual, both devastatingly effective. The first was to Pauline Chen, the president of the philanthropy board where he served. He mentioned in passing that the Powells might need to step back temporarily from some commitments due to family health issues. Not his health, family health, the kind of vague phrasing that invited concerned questions. When Pauline asked if everything was all right, Robert had sighed and said, "We're managing, just some challenges with Olivia's well-being. We're trying to handle it privately." The second call was to the Wright's family attorney, someone Robert had met at a golf fundraiser. "Just checking in. Congratulations on the upcoming wedding. Wonderful to be joining families." Then, almost as an afterthought, "I should mention, in the spirit of full transparency, we have some concerns about one of our family members potentially disrupting the wedding planning. Psychological struggles, unfortunately. We're hoping to get her appropriate help before any events." These weren't accusations. They were concerns from a worried father. If I later made any allegations about the family, these contacts would remember Robert as the man who'd tried to handle things quietly, who'd been upfront about my issues, who'd done everything right while dealing with a difficult daughter. I knew none of this as I sat at my kitchen table over the weekend preparing for Tuesday. But I knew my family, and I knew they wouldn't go quietly. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not emotions, not grievances, just facts. A timeline of every family event I'd been excluded from in the past decade. Maddie's college graduation party, where I learned about it from Facebook photos. The family vacation to Martha's Vineyard 2 summers ago that I only heard about when my father mentioned it in passing 3 weeks after they'd returned. The charity gala last year where the Powell family was honored and I wasn't mentioned in the program or seated at their table. For each event, I listed dates, locations, and any witnesses who might remember my absence. I documented every instance where the family was described in print as Robert and Helen Powell and their daughter Maddie. I saved every screenshot, every article, creating a pattern that was undeniable. Then I started researching Helen. I'd never really questioned the timeline before. I'd been too young when it happened, and by the time I was old enough to ask questions, the subject of my mother was firmly closed. But sitting there with access to public records and marriage licenses, I saw something that made me pause. Maria Chen Powell. My mother died in August 1991. The death certificate listed acute liver failure following a vehicular accident. Helen Richardson married Robert Powell in July 1992, 11 months. Not even a year of widowhood before he'd remarried. It could have been innocent. Grief makes people do impulsive things, but it could also mean something else entirely, that Helen had been in the picture before my mother died. I had no proof, just a timeline that felt wrong. I added the marriage records to my evidence folder and kept digging. Helen had worked at Powell Industries starting in 1990, first as Robert's executive assistant, then promoted to director of operations 6 months after they married. Had she been the assistant when my mother was still alive, I was still searching when my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "My parents just asked why I invited someone named Olivia Powell. They've never heard of you." I read Ethan's text twice, then typed back a single word, "Perfect." If his parents had never heard of me, the shock on their faces when I walked through their door would be genuine. And genuine shock was much harder for my family to spin than prepared explanations. Tuesday evening arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully, a navy sheath dress, pearl earrings, low heels, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a professional woman attending a family dinner, unremarkable and unthreatening. The Wright family home was in Briarcliff Heights, the kind of neighborhood where old money went to stay old. The house itself was a Georgian mansion set back from the street, all elegant columns and manicured hedges lit by discreet landscape lighting. I pulled up to the circular driveway at exactly 7 o'clock. Ethan met me at the door before I could even ring the bell. He was in slacks and a crisp button-down, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Are you?" I replied. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. He opened the door wider and gestured me inside. The entry hall was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Ethan led me through to a formal dining room where 2 people were already seated at one end of a table that could have accommodated 12. They stood as we entered. "Mom, Dad," Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly. "I'd like you to meet Olivia Powell, Maddie's older sister." Margaret Wright's fork, which she'd been placing beside her plate, froze mid-air. She was an elegant woman in her early 60s, silver hair swept back in a French twist, wearing what I recognized as Chanel. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "I'm sorry." She glanced at her husband, then back to Ethan. "Maddie has a sister, Robert, and Helen never mentioned." The doorbell chimed, cutting off whatever she was about to say. Ethan checked his watch with theatrical precision. "That'll be them now. Excuse me?" I watched him leave, calculating the timing. 15 minutes after my arrival. Late enough to ensure I was already inside and introduced early enough to seem like normal dinner party timing rather than deliberate coordination. They'd seen my car in the driveway. They knew exactly what they were walking into. When the Powells entered the dining room, I had to admire the performance. Helen's face transformed into pure maternal joy the moment she saw me. She rushed forward, actually rushed in heels and a silk dress, and pulled me into an embrace that looked absolutely genuine. "Olivia, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came." She held me at arm's length, looking into my eyes with what appeared to be tender concern, then turned to the Wrights without releasing my hand. "Margaret, Thomas, I apologize. We should have mentioned Olivia sooner. She's been going through such a difficult time, and we didn't want to burden the wedding planning with family health matters." She said this while squeezing my hand, the gesture appearing comforting and protective to anyone watching. I felt her thumb press against my pulse point, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to remind me she was in control. Robert moved to my other side, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Olivia prefers privacy, which we respect. But Ethan was right. It's important for our families to meet fully before the wedding." Just like that, they'd flipped the entire narrative. I wasn't the daughter they'd erased. I was the daughter who preferred privacy, who struggled with health issues, who they were protecting by keeping her away from public family events. My absence was my choice, my preference, my struggle. Margaret and Thomas Wright exchanged a glance, their expressions shifting from confused to sympathetic. "Of course," Margaret said warmly, "we completely understand. Family health is so important. Please, everyone sit. I'm glad you're here, Olivia." I sat in the chair Ethan held out for me directly across from my father, with Helen to my right. If I contradicted their story now in front of these strangers, I would look like I was attacking my caring, concerned parents for no reason. They'd positioned themselves as the wounded party before I'd said a single word. Dinner was served, some kind of duck with a reduction sauce that I barely tasted. The conversation flowed around wedding plans, venue details, the guest list. I stayed mostly silent, answering direct questions politely, but offering nothing additional. "We were just speaking with Dr. Zhao recently," Helen said about halfway through the main course, her tone light and conversational. "He's so glad you're doing better now, Olivia." There it was. The reminder. The subtle threat. They had a licensed therapist prepared to back their version of events. Dr. Zhao, who I'd seen 4 times 2 decades ago, was apparently monitoring my current well-being and reporting back to my parents. Robert picked up the thread seamlessly. "We've always tried to protect Olivia from social pressure," he said to Thomas Wright man to man, as if sharing a parenting confidence. "Too many events, too many people, it can be overwhelming for her." Every word was a brick in the wall they were building around me. Fragile, unreliable, prone to episodes, someone who needed protection from the very social circles they moved in so effortlessly. I looked across the table and caught Ethan's eye. He'd been watching the entire performance with the analytical attention of someone conducting an experiment. I gave him the smallest nod, so slight that if you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it entirely. The message was clear. I see exactly what they're doing. His expression didn't change, but I saw understanding register. As dessert was being cleared, Margaret stood and asked Helen if she could speak with her privately for a moment, something about bridesmaid dress fittings. They moved toward the doorway, but Margaret's voice carried back to the table, pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is Olivia safe to be around Maddie right now?" I left the Wright house with Margaret's question still hanging in the air like poison. Helen had responded with perfect maternal concern, assuring Margaret that I was doing much better and that family support makes all the difference. I'd smiled politely, thanked them for dinner, and walked out with my head high. But by the time I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage 40 minutes later, the adrenaline had worn off and exhaustion had set in. I rode the elevator to the 8th floor, fumbled with my keys, and pushed open my apartment door. The deadbolt was locked exactly as I'd left it. But something felt wrong. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, scanning the small entryway. My mail was stacked on the console table where I always left it, but the angle was slightly off. The envelopes were aligned too neatly, like someone had looked through them and restacked them carefully. I moved into the kitchen. The drawer where I kept takeout menus wasn't fully closed. I always closed that drawer completely because it stuck otherwise. I checked the windows, locked, the bathroom untouched. My bedroom looked normal, but when I opened my closet, I noticed my winter coats were pushed slightly to the left. Someone had moved them. My laptop was still on my desk, closed but not stolen. I opened it and checked the login history. No unauthorized access. My jewelry box in the bedroom hadn't been touched. My grandmother's diamond earrings were still there, worth at least $2,000. I called building security from my cell phone, keeping my voice steady. "This is Olivia Powell in 8C. Can you check the security footage for my floor today? I think someone might have entered my apartment." The security guard, a bored-sounding man named Marcus, put me on hold and came back 2 minutes later. "Footage shows no one entering or leaving your unit today, Ms. Powell. Your door didn't open between 8:15 this morning when you left and 7:40 tonight when you returned. Can you check the hallway cameras for the whole day?" Another pause. "There's a gap from 2 to 2:30 p.m. System was down for maintenance." "Maintenance, I wasn't notified." "Says here it was scheduled building-wide, but like I said, your door didn't open." I thanked him and hung up. Someone with resources, someone who could coordinate with building staff or pay for cooperation, could have orchestrated that maintenance window. And whoever had been here hadn't stolen anything. They'd been looking for something specific. I sat on my couch thinking, what could I possibly have that my family wanted badly enough to break into my apartment? I'd documented their exclusion of me, but that was all digital, backed up to the cloud. There was nothing physical here. That the memory hit me so suddenly, I actually gasped. The box. I was 10 years old, small for my age, sitting in the living room of the house I grew up in when the doorbell rang. A woman I'd never met before stood there, older, with my mother's dark hair and narrow face. She'd introduced herself as Aunt Diane, Maria's sister, and Helen had gone rigid in the doorway. "I'm just here to drop something off for Olivia," Diane had said, holding a small wooden box. "Maria wanted her to have it." Helen had reached for it immediately. "I'll take that." "No." Diane had stepped past her, walked directly to where I sat on the carpet with my coloring books, and pressed the box into my hands. "Your mother wanted you to have this when you were old enough to understand. Keep it safe." She'd left before Helen could argue. I remember Helen trying to take the box later, telling me it was just old papers, nothing important, but I'd hidden it in the back of my closet behind my stuffed animals. Eventually, as I got older and that house felt less and less like home, I'd moved it to a storage unit with my other childhood belongings. I hadn't thought about that box in 26 years. I grabbed my keys and drove to the storage facility, a climate-controlled place on the edge of town that I paid $60 a month to maintain. Unit 247 contained boxes of college textbooks, old winter clothes I couldn't bear to throw away, and 3 plastic tubs of childhood memories I'd salvaged when I finally moved out at 22. The wooden box was in the second tub underneath my high school yearbooks. It was smaller than I remembered, maybe 8 inches long, dark mahogany with brass hinges. Still locked. I turned it over and found a small key taped to the bottom with yellowed tape. Aunt Diane must have put it there, knowing I was too young to understand its importance. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Inside was a single sheet of paper handwritten in neat cursive and a business card. I lifted out the letter first, recognizing my mother's handwriting from the few birthday cards I had that Helen hadn't thrown away. Olivia, it read, dated 3 weeks before her death in August 1991. If you're reading this, I'm gone and it wasn't an accident. I've left documented with Harold Chen proving what your father has done. Don't trust the official story. Don't trust anyone in the Powell family. Wait until you're 35 and financially independent before you seek the truth. I love you. Protect yourself first. The business card was cream-colored, slightly yellowed with age. Harold Chen, estate attorney. Below the printed address and phone number, someone had written in pen, "He has something for you when you turn 35. I was 36. My birthday had been in April. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card, half expecting it to be disconnected after 34 years. It rang twice. A gravelly male voice answered, "Harold Chen speaking." I opened my mouth, not sure what to say. "I've been expecting your call," he continued, "though you're a few months early." "I'm sorry," I said, finding my voice. "You've been expecting me?" "Your mother set very specific instructions," Harold Chen replied, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age but no hesitation. "I was to contact you on your 35th birthday. You turned 35 in April, correct?" 36. My birthday was 7 months ago." A long pause. "Then I'm late and I apologize. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning 9 o'clock? I'll text you the address." Before I could respond, he added, "And Ms. Powell, come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." He hung up before I could ask any of the dozen questions racing through my mind. I barely slept that night. By 8:30 the next morning, I was parked outside a modest office building in the financial district, nursing my second coffee and watching the entrance. At 8:55, I locked my car and went inside. Harold Chen's office was on the 3rd floor, tucked at the end of a quiet hallway. The nameplate on the door read, "Chen and Associates Estate Planning." I knocked and heard a faint, "Come in." The man who stood to greet me was thin, probably 5'6", with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked every bit of 76, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp. "Ms. Powell, please sit." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, which was covered in meticulously organized files. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I should have reached out months ago." "What circumstances?" I asked, sitting. "I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in August, stage 4. The doctors give me perhaps 6 months, maybe less." He said this matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "I couldn't risk dying before fulfilling my obligation to your mother." He pulled a file from his desk, thick labeled Powell Maria, in faded ink, and opened it. "In July of 1991, your mother came to this office. She was terrified. She told me she believed her husband was trying to kill her, and that if anything happened to her, she needed to protect you." The words hung in the air. I gripped the arms of my chair. She asked me to set up a small trust fund to pay for the maintenance of a safe deposit box and to hold certain documents until you turned 35. She chose 35 specifically because she believed that by then you'd be financially independent and emotionally mature enough to handle the truth. She made me promise not to contact you before then, no matter what. And you kept that promise for 34 years. I did. Though I tried to contact you when you turned 18 again at 25 and once more at 30. I sent certified letters to your father's address, all returned marked, "Addressee unknown." I called the Powell residence multiple times. Someone always answered, said they'd pass along the message, but you never called back. "I never got any messages," I said quietly. "I suspected as much." Chen closed the file and stood. "I have legal authorization for you to access the safe deposit box. I'll accompany you to the bank as witness. Everything your mother left is there." 20 minutes later, we were standing in the vault of First National Bank. Chen handed the bank manager the authorization paperwork and a small brass key. The manager led us to box 247, inserted both his key and Chen's, and pulled out a long metal box. He placed it on the table in the private viewing room and left us alone. Chen nodded at me. Go ahead. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a manila folder. Inside were incorporation documents for Powell Industries dated 1987. My mother's name was typed clearly: Maria Chen Powell, co-founder, 50% equity owner. I did quick math in my head. If the company was worth $45 million, now half of that belonged to my mother's estate. Belonged to me. Beneath that was a will notarized and witnessed dated July 15, 1991. I, Maria Chen Powell, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my assets including my ownership stake in Powell Industries to my daughter Olivia, Maria Powell. The third item was a spiral-bound notebook, the kind you buy at any drugstore. I opened it and saw my mother's handwriting, pages and pages of dated entries. June 3, 1991. Severe nausea after dinner. Vomited 3 times. Robert, very concerned, made me soup. June 10. Hair coming out in clumps when I brush it. Robert says it's stress. June 18. Abdominal pain so severe I couldn't stand. Robert called doctor who prescribed antacids. I flipped through weeks of entries watching the symptoms escalate. Chronic poisoning. That's what this looked like. The fourth item was a small glass vial sealed with wax containing several strands of dark hair. A label in my mother's handwriting for DNA testing if needed. The last item made my blood run cold. A death certificate, official state seal and all. Maria Chen Powell. Date of death: August 3, 1991. Cause acute liver failure following vehicular accident. But my mother's diary had entries dated August 7th, August 12th, August 19th. She'd been alive for weeks after the date listed on her death certificate. The timeline was impossible. The death certificate is false, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Chen nodded gravely. Your mother suspected your father would falsify the circumstances of her death. She documented everything to prove it. I carefully placed each item back in the box, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. You said you tried to contact me 3 times over the years, and there's something else you should know. Chen leaned back in his chair. 5 years ago, I received a phone call from a man who claimed to be acting on behalf of the Powell estate. He said the family was settling old business and wanted to purchase any documents related to Maria Powell. He offered $100,000, no questions asked, immediate wire transfer. You refused. Of course. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. But the timing was interesting. You would have been 31, old enough to start asking questions about your mother if you'd ever gotten curious. I suspect your father was trying to eliminate any evidence before you stumbled across it. He knows something exists. He just doesn't know what or where. Exactly. Which means when you leave here today with these documents, you need to be extremely careful. Your father has already demonstrated he's willing to falsify death records and intercept communications. He's had 34 years to cover his tracks. We completed the paperwork to transfer the safe deposit box contents to my possession. The bank provided me with a locked document case, and I carefully placed everything inside. Chen walked me to the bank's entrance. What will you do? He asked. I don't know yet. But thank you for keeping your promise to my mother. He gripped my hand with surprising strength. She was a brave woman. She loved you very much. I stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, the document case heavy in my arms. I was halfway to my car when I saw it, a black SUV with tinted windows parked directly across the street. The same vehicle I'd noticed near my apartment building this morning when I'd left. The engine was running. I stood on the sidewalk, the document case clutched against my chest, and stared at the SUV. Whoever was inside made no attempt to hide. The engine idled steadily, exhaust visible in the cold air. They wanted me to see them. I walked to my car with deliberate calm, refusing to rush or show fear. I placed the document case in the trunk, locked it, and got behind the wheel. The SUV didn't move as I pulled out of the parking space. It stayed exactly where it was, engine running, watching me leave. I drove 3 blocks before it appeared in my rearview mirror. It didn't tailgate or weave through traffic. It maintained a steady distance, 2 or 3 cars back, never trying to hide. At a red light, I could see it clearly, black, expensive, tinted windows that made it impossible to see who was inside. When the light turned green, it followed. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I took an unexpected turn down a residential street, it followed without hesitation. This wasn't surveillance. This was a message. I made a decision and turned into the parking lot of the 3rd Precinct Police Station. The SUV drove past the entrance, slowly, the driver making no attempt to speed up or disappear. I watched it circle the block and park across the street in clear view, engines still running. Inside the station, a bored-looking officer sat behind a plexiglass window. I explained I was being followed and provided the license plate number I'd memorized. He took my information with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, he called me back to the window. Vehicle is registered to Sentinel Executive Protection Services. It's a licensed security firm that provides bodyguard and surveillance services. Technically, they're not doing anything illegal unless they're making threats or blocking your movement. They've been following me for hours. On public streets, which is legal. Unless you have evidence of threatening behavior or they've violated a restraining order, there's not much we can do. You can file a report, but it'll likely just be documented. I filed the report anyway, knowing it was probably pointless. When I walked back outside, the SUV was gone. But the message had been delivered perfectly. They could follow me anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing illegal about it. I drove home checking my mirrors constantly, but saw no sign of the SUV. When I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage, I sat in my car for a full minute scanning the shadows. Nothing. I took the elevator to the lobby, planning to collect my mail before going upstairs. The lobby was empty except for one person sitting in the leather chair near the fireplace reading a magazine. Helen. She looked up as I entered and her face transformed into a warm smile. Olivia, I hoped I'd catch you. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice level. How did you get in here? The doorman knows me. I mentioned I was your mother and wanted to surprise you. She stood smoothing her skirt. Can we talk somewhere private? We can talk right here. Helen glanced around the empty lobby, then back to me. Her smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. I know you met Harold Chen today. I know what Maria left behind. The casual confirmation of surveillance should have shocked me, but somehow it didn't. Of course they'd been tracking my movements. The building security, the SUV, the perfectly timed appearance, they'd been watching me since the moment I'd started asking questions. Whatever Maria told you in those documents, Helen continued, her voice gentle, almost concerned. It's incomplete. You have to understand she was very unwell at the end. The stress of the business, the problems in the marriage. She wasn't thinking clearly. She seemed perfectly clear in her diary entries. Helen's expression shifted to something that looked like pity. She had delusions, Olivia. The doctors at the time documented it. The accident was tragic, but it was just that, an accident. She'd been having dizzy spells, wasn't sleeping well. Your father tried everything to help her. Then why did he erase me from the family? We didn't erase you. We protected you. You were so young when Maria died, and the circumstances were so painful. We thought it was better if you didn't carry that burden publicly. She took a step closer. If you're planning to make accusations based on what you found, you should know Dr. Zhao has already documented your history of creating false narratives. Any lawyer will use that to discredit you. There it was again. Dr. Zhao, the therapist I'd seen 4 times 20 years ago, weaponized into character assassination. Helen must have seen something in my face because she softened her approach. Let me be clear about what you're facing, Olivia. You have some old documents and a diary written by a woman who was clearly unwell. We have a death certificate signed by a medical examiner. We have police reports from the accident. We have hospital records. We have a licensed psychiatrist who can testify to your emotional struggles. She counted these off like items on a shopping list, her voice never rising above that gentle, reasonable tone. You have no witnesses. Maria is dead, and anyone who worked at the company back then is either retired or deceased. You have no police investigation from the time because there was nothing to investigate. You have a theory, Olivia? We have facts. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, placing it on the lobby desk. Your father doesn't want this to become ugly. He's willing to offer you a settlement. $2 million in exchange for signing away any claim to Powell Industries and agreeing not to publicly discuss Maria's death. It's more than fair given that you have no legal standing to claim anything. You have 3 days to decide. Helen walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. I know you're angry. I know you feel wronged. But think carefully about what you're risking. You have a life, a career, a reputation. All of that disappears the moment you make accusations you can't prove. We're offering you a way forward. Take it." She left without waiting for a response. I stood in the lobby for a long moment, then rode the elevator up to my floor. When I reached my apartment door, I saw a manila envelope on the floor slipped underneath while I'd been downstairs. Inside was a check for $2 million already signed by Robert Powell. Attached to it was a legal contract 3 pages long with highlighted sections indicating where I needed to sign. The check felt heavy in my hand, like it weighed more than paper should. I sat on my couch with the check in one hand and my phone in the other. $2 million. The number felt both impossibly large and insultingly small. My mother had owned half of a company worth $45 million, and they were offering me less than 5% of what she'd built. I needed perspective. I needed someone who understood the game being played. I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "Olivia, I was wondering when you'd call." "I need to tell you something." I explained about Harold Chen, about the safe deposit box, about the documents proving my mother's ownership, and the medical diary documenting her symptoms. I didn't give him every detail. Trust only went so far, but I gave him enough. Then I told him about the settlement offer. There was a long pause on the other end, long enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the call had dropped. "I need to tell you something, too," Ethan finally said, his voice careful. "My father received a phone call from Robert Powell yesterday." My stomach dropped. What kind of call? He framed it as a courtesy, father to father, man to man. He told my dad that you might approach our family with some unfounded accusations and that the Powell family is trying to handle it privately with professional help. He said you've been struggling with psychological issues and that if you start making conspiracy theories about your mother's death, we should understand you're having an episode and contact him immediately. I closed my eyes. Of course, Robert had gotten ahead of this poisoning well before I could even try to drink from it. "My father believed him," Ethan continued. "Or at least he believed enough to be cautious. He doesn't want any scandal attached to the wedding. He told me if you try to make a scene or spread rumors, I'm to call Robert immediately and let him handle his family business." "So your father is now conditioned to disbelieve anything I say?" "Yes." I should have been angry, but instead I just felt tired. "And you? Do you believe I'm having an episode?" "No." His answer was immediate. "I believe something is very wrong with your family. I believe you're being erased and manipulated. But Olivia, I need you to understand my position. I can't publicly take your side against your father without proof that would hold up legally, not just morally. If I do that, my family will think I've been manipulated by you. They'll force me to choose between supporting you and protecting them. And I'll lose everything. So you're choosing them. I'm choosing survival, just like you've been doing your whole life." His voice softened slightly. "Look, I'm not saying I won't help you. I'm saying I can't do it publicly. I'll help you quietly. I can give you information access resources. But I can't stand next to you at a press conference or testify on your behalf until you have something so undeniable that even my father can't dismiss it." It was honest, at least. Ethan wasn't pretending to be a hero. He was a man protecting his own interests, and in a twisted way I could respect that more than false promises. "What kind of help are you offering?" I asked. "I'm sending you a file right now. The complete wedding guest list with home addresses and company affiliations. 214 people. Everyone who matters in this city will be in that room. Politicians, business leaders, the president of the Children's Hospital Foundation, 3 city council members, the CEO of Wright Holdings, board members from a dozen different companies." My phone buzzed with an incoming email. I opened it and saw a spreadsheet meticulously organized. "If you're going to do something," Ethan continued, "the wedding is your moment. Everyone with power and influence will be gathered in one place. But you need to understand what you're risking. If you disrupt that wedding without airtight proof, and I mean proof that would convince a jury, not just you, you'll be blamed. You'll be arrested for disturbing the peace or harassment, and they'll use it to prove everything your father has been saying about you. You'll be branded as mentally unstable, and it won't matter if you're right. No one will listen to you afterward. So whatever I'm planning, it needs to be bulletproof." "Exactly. I'm giving you the battlefield. But you need to bring weapons that won't misfire." He paused. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I know you wanted an ally who'd stand beside you no matter what. I can't be that person, but I can be someone who gives you the tools to fight your own battle." "Why?" I asked. "Why help at all if you're not willing to go public?" "Because I don't like being lied to. And because if your father is capable of what you're suggesting, I don't want my family connected to his." His voice hardened. "But mostly because I think you deserve the truth about your mother, even if I'm too much of a coward to help you find it publicly." We hung up shortly after. I sat staring at the guest list, scrolling through names I recognized from society pages and business articles. Each one represented a piece of the social web my father had spent decades weaving. Each one was someone whose opinion mattered, whose disapproval would hurt more than any legal judgment. Ethan was right. If I was going to do this, it had to be perfect. I was still studying the list when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know what happened to your mother. We need to meet. Dorothy M." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Dorothy M. The name meant nothing to me, but someone out there claimed to know about my mother's death. Someone who'd found my number and was reaching out now just days after I'd recovered the documents. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came within seconds. "I was the nurse on duty the night your mother died. I've been waiting 34 years for someone to ask the right questions." I stared at the text message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. A nurse who was there when my mother died. Someone who'd been waiting 34 years for the right questions. I responded immediately. "When and where?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park North entrance. I'll be wearing a blue cardigan." The next morning arrived cold and overcast. I got to the park 15 minutes early and waited on a bench near the entrance, watching every person who passed. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman approached, petite, maybe 5'3", with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a blue cardigan over a floral dress. She looked to be in her late 60s, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints didn't work quite like they used to. "Olivia," she asked. "Dorothy." She sat beside me on the bench, setting a worn leather bag at her feet. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you'd come." "Why are you coming forward now?" "I'm moving to Arizona next month to live with my daughter. She has grandchildren I want to spend time with while I still can." Dorothy folded her hands in her lap. "I've carried this secret for 34 years, and I'm tired of it. I'm too old to be afraid of the Powells anymore." "You worked at the hospital where my mother was treated. St. Catherine's Memorial, on the oncology and internal medicine floor. Your mother was admitted 4 times in her last 3 months. July 9th, July 22nd, August 1st, and August 20th. Each time for acute gastric distress and what we called unexplained liver enzyme elevation. The doctors kept attributing it to stress or maybe some dietary issue. Told her to rest, to drink more water, to avoid spicy foods." Dorothy's voice was matter-of-fact clinical, but her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I'd done my toxicology training at Johns Hopkins before I came to St. Catherine's. I knew what heavy metal poisoning looked like: the nausea, the hair loss, the liver damage. Your mother had all the symptoms, so I mentioned it to Dr. Patterson, the attending physician. He laughed at me, said I was being dramatic, that married women in stressful situations sometimes develop psychosomatic symptoms. But you didn't think it was psychosomatic. I knew it wasn't. I'd seen too many cases." Dorothy reached into her bag and pulled out a faded manila folder. "I kept copies of everything. My nursing notes, her charts, medication records. I wasn't supposed to take them when I left St. Catherine's, but I did anyway." She handed me the folder. Inside were photocopies of medical charts, handwritten notes, and Dorothy's neat script medication logs. I saw my mother's name over and over: Maria Powell, admitted July 9th, 1991. Complaints: severe nausea, vomiting, weakness. Temperature 99.8. Blood work ordered. "Your father visited every day," Dorothy continued. "Most husbands didn't do that. Most visited once or twice and then let the nurses handle it. But Robert Powell came every afternoon, always brought her homemade meals or smoothies because he said the hospital food was terrible. He was so attentive, so concerned. The other nurses thought he was wonderful." "But you noticed something." "I noticed that Maria's symptoms always got worse after his visits. She'd be relatively stable in the morning, then by evening she'd be vomiting again, complaining of abdominal pain. I started tracking it in my personal notes, which visits coincided with which symptom flare-ups. The pattern was undeniable. Dorothy pulled out a small spiral notebook from her bag, its pages yellowed and fragile. This was my personal log. See July 10th, Robert visited from 2 to 4 p.m. brought chicken soup. Maria vomited at 6 p.m. and again at 9. July 23rd, Robert visited from 1 to 3 brought a fruit smoothie. Maria developed severe cramping at 5 p.m. liver enzymes spiked overnight. I flipped through the pages seeing the meticulous documentation of what Dorothy had witnessed. I went to Dr. Patterson again, showed him the pattern. I suggested we test Maria for heavy metals, arsenic, thallium, anything that could cause these symptoms. He refused, said I was making wild accusations about a devoted husband, that if I kept pushing this theory, I'd find myself reported to the nursing board for creating a hostile environment for patients' families. He was protecting my father. Dr. Patterson played golf with your father every Thursday. They were friends. Dorothy's voice was bitter. The hospital administrator called me in after Maria died. Told me my unfounded suggestions could result in disciplinary action if I ever mentioned them again. Told me the family was grieving and didn't need a nurse spreading conspiracy theories. I was 23 years from retirement and raising 2 kids on my own. I couldn't afford to lose my license. So you stayed silent. I stayed silent and hated myself for it. Dorothy looked at me directly for the first time and I saw tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Olivia. I should have fought harder. I should have gone to the police, to the medical examiner, to someone. But I was scared and I was alone and your father was powerful. You kept the records, though. I kept them because I knew someday someone would ask. I just didn't know it would take 34 years. She gestured to the folder in my hands. I'll give you everything I have. I'll write an affidavit. I'll testify if you need me to. But I need you to understand this won't be enough for a criminal case. Too much time has passed. There's no body to autopsy because your mother was cremated. St. Catherine's closed 15 years ago and most of their records were destroyed. My testimony is just the word of an elderly retired nurse against a wealthy, respected businessman. But it corroborates my mother's diary. It establishes a pattern. It does. And it proves that multiple people noticed something was wrong, but your father's social power was enough to silence all of us. Dorothy closed her bag. You need to understand how this will play out if you go public. They'll attack my credibility. They'll say I'm old misremembering after all these years, or that I'm seeking attention or trying to profit from tragedy. They won't disprove what I'm saying, they'll just make people not want to believe it. That's how powerful people operate. I helped Dorothy to her feet, and we walked slowly toward the parking lot. She moved like someone who'd carried a heavy weight for too long and was finally setting it down. Why did you keep this secret if it bothered you so much? I asked. Because I had children to feed and bills to pay. Because I was afraid. Because I told myself it wasn't my place. She stopped at an old Honda Civic. But I'm dying too, Olivia. Not from cancer like Harold Chen, but from emphysema. Maybe 2 years left if I'm lucky. I don't want to meet my maker knowing I let a murderer walk free because I was too much of a coward to speak up. I was opening my mouth to thank her when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Robert Powell. Dorothy saw the name and went pale. He knows, I answered. My father's voice came through cold and precise as a scalpel. I know you met with the nurse. This is your last warning. I stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, Dorothy frozen beside her car door. My father's voice was ice through the speaker. I know you met with the nurse. This is your last warning. I kept my voice steady. Warning of what? Think very carefully about your next steps, Olivia. You're playing a game you don't understand with stakes you can't afford. The line went dead. Dorothy was already fumbling with her car keys, her hands shaking. He knows. How does he know? I thought about the black SUV, the surveillance, the way Helen had appeared in my lobby, knowing exactly where I'd been. He's been watching me. Probably has someone following me. Then I shouldn't have contacted you. I've put you in danger. No, I said firmly. You gave me what I needed. A witness. Corroboration. Now I need to figure out how to use it. I spent the drive home mentally cataloging everything I had in corporation documents proving my mother's ownership, her will, Her medical diary documenting symptoms, Dorothy's nursing notes and testimony, the hair sample for DNA, the falsified death certificate. A pile of evidence that pointed to something terrible, but proved nothing conclusively. The next morning I called Harold Chen and asked if we could meet at his office. When I arrived, I spread everything across his desk documents, photographs, Dorothy's folder, the timeline I'd constructed. Chen put on his reading glasses and studied it all with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent 50 years reviewing evidence. After 20 minutes, he sat back and folded his hands. "This would never result in criminal charges," he said. "The statute of limitations for murder in this state is technically unlimited, but the practical reality is different. It's been 34 years. Proving Robert poisoned Maria beyond reasonable doubt is nearly impossible without an autopsy, and she was cremated. You have no witnesses to the actual act of poisoning, no confession, no physical evidence that would stand up in court." "What about civil court?" "Maybe. You could file a wrongful death suit, claim damages for the loss of your mother and the theft of her company shares. But it would take years. The legal fees would run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly more. And the Powells would outspend you 10 to 1. They'd bury you in motions, depositions, continuances. They'd drag Dorothy through brutal cross-examination about her memory, her motivations, whether she kept those records legally. They'd make it so expensive and painful that most people would give up." I'd expected this, but hearing it laid out so clearly still felt like a punch to the chest. "So you're saying I should take the settlement?" Chen removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I'm saying that from a legal perspective, the settlement is the smart move. $2 million, walk away, live your life. Fighting this in court would likely cost you more than you'd win both financially and emotionally." "But," I heard the hesitation in his voice, "but I didn't keep your mother's documents for 34 years, so you could take a payoff and stay silent. I did it because she asked me to give you the truth. What you do with that truth is up to you." I leaned forward. "If I can't get legal justice, I'll get social justice. I don't need him in prison. I need everyone to know who he really is." Chen looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tell me what you're thinking." I pulled out my laptop and opened the wedding guest list Ethan had sent me. "The wedding is in 6 days. I'm technically invited. I received an invitation after that disaster at the Wrights' house. 214 guests, all assembled in one room. City council members, business partners, the boards of 3 major charitable foundations, CEOs, the city's elite." I pointed to 3 names I'd highlighted. "During the reception, I'll approach 3 specific people. First, Thomas and Margaret Wright. They need to know what family they're connecting to. Second, Pauline Chen, no relation to you, she's president of the Metropolitan Philanthropic Foundation, where Robert serves on the board. Third, James Ortega, an investigative journalist who's been researching suspicious deaths for a true crime podcast series." "You're going to give them the documents?" "Copies, yes. I'll prepare packets with everything: the incorporation papers, Maria's diary excerpts, Dorothy's affidavit, the medical notes, the falsified death certificate, a clear timeline. No emotional commentary, just facts. I'm not accusing Robert of murder publicly. I'm simply sharing my mother's documents and asking questions." Chen was already shaking his head. "They'll claim you're having a breakdown. They'll trot out Dr. Zhao's professional opinion. They'll threaten defamation lawsuits. Let them. I'm not making any false statements. Every document is real. The timeline is factual. I'm not demanding anything or making public accusations. I'm putting information in front of people who have the power and resources to investigate if they choose." I met his eyes. "I can't put him in prison. But I can make the social cost of associating with him too high for the circles he's spent decades cultivating." Chen was quiet, considering. "You understand what you're risking. If this backfires, you'll be branded as mentally unstable. Your career, your reputation, your relationships, all of it could be destroyed. If I take the settlement and stay quiet, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have stopped him. If there are other people he's hurt that I could have protected, that's not a life I want to live." We spent the next 3 hours wargaming every possible response. Robert would immediately try to have me removed from the venue, claiming I was disrupting a private event. But I'd be a legitimate invited guest, and as long as I wasn't physically threatening anyone or destroying property security, couldn't legally force me out. He'd claim I was having a mental health crisis, but that would be harder to prove if I remained calm and professional. He'd threatened to sue me for defamation, but truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and every document I was sharing was genuine. The key was staying clinical, factual, unemotional. The moment I became hysterical or accusatory, I'd play into their narrative about my instability. Chen helped me draft the executive summary that would go in each packet, 2 pages outlining the key facts and questions without inflammatory language. Why was Maria Powell's 50% ownership of Powell Industries never mentioned in probate? Why do death certificate dates conflict with medical records? Why were concerns about poisoning symptoms dismissed by hospital staff? Questions, not accusations. Facts, not theories. 3 days before the wedding, a courier arrived at my apartment with a thick legal envelope. Inside was an amended settlement agreement from Robert's attorney. The offer had been increased to $3 million, but the confidentiality clause had been expanded. If I ever spoke publicly about Maria's death, published anything about the circumstances, or provided information to journalists or investigators, I would be required to immediately repay the full $3 million plus damages, legal fees, and punitive compensation that could reach into the tens of millions. They were trying to price me into silence. I took a photo of the contract and texted it to Chen. "They're scared." His response came back immediately. "Good. That means you're getting close to something they can't afford to have exposed." The text came 2 hours after I'd photographed the contract. Unknown number, but I knew who it was. "We should meet, face to face, just you and me. Marchand's tomorrow at noon." Marchand's was the kind of restaurant where corporate executives closed deals and politicians made backroom agreements. White tablecloth servers who knew when to disappear and enough ambient noise to make recording conversations difficult. The choice of venue was deliberate, neutral, public, but private enough for frank discussion. I arrived exactly at noon and found him already seated at a corner table positioned so he could see the entire dining room. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks that caught the light. He looked every bit the successful businessman, composed, confident, in complete control. He stood as I approached, pulled out my chair like a gentleman. The server appeared immediately, and Robert ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Sparkling water, the Dover sole, Caesar salad to start. I didn't object. This meeting wasn't about food. "Thank you for coming," he said once the server had left. His voice was cordial, professional, like we were discussing a merger. The contract sat on the table between us, already removed from its envelope. $3 million. I could see my name on the signature line waiting. "You're intelligent enough to understand how the world works." Robert began sliding the contract slightly closer to my side of the table. "You have accusations. I have resources. You have emotion. I have institutions. Even if you're right, and I'm not saying you are, you can't prove it in any way that matters." He said this without anger, without defensiveness, just stating facts. "This money gives you freedom. You can start over anywhere, do anything you want, buy a house, travel, build a business, live comfortably for the rest of your life." He paused while the server set down our salads, waited until we were alone again. "Or you can spend years fighting me and end up with nothing except a reputation as an unstable woman with delusions." I picked at my salad, not tasting it, letting him talk. "Let me be very clear about what happens if you refuse this offer." He continued, his tone never rising above conversational. "You'll be uninvited from the wedding. If you show up anyway and try to enter, you'll be escorted out by security. If you attempt to distribute documents or make accusations, I'll file an injunction and have you arrested for harassment and disturbing the peace. Dr. Zhao will provide expert testimony that you're experiencing a psychotic episode requiring immediate intervention." He took a sip of water, perfectly calm. "Every relationship you have will be scrutinized. Your employer will receive a concerned call from a family member worried about your mental health and whether you're fit to handle sensitive financial information. Your landlord will hear that you've been making threats and acting erratically. Friends will be told you're having a breakdown and to contact us if you reach out to them." The food arrived, perfectly plated fish that I had no appetite for. Robert cut into his with surgical precision. "I won't destroy you directly, Olivia. I'll let you destroy yourself by fighting a battle you can't win. Every door you try to open, I'll have closed it 5 minutes earlier. Every person you try to convince, I'll have already spoken to. You'll exhaust yourself, drain whatever savings you have on legal fees, and in the end, you'll still have nothing." He set down his fork and looked at me directly. "This isn't defeat. It's accepting reality. Take the money. Live well. Let Maria rest." He pushed the contract the final few inches across the table. "You have a pen." The cruelty wasn't in the threats. It was in how reasonable he made it all sound. How logical. How inevitable. For the first time since this began, I genuinely considered it. $3 million. I could disappear. Move to Seattle or Portland or anywhere far from this city and these people. Buy a small house. Maybe open my own consulting firm, work with clients who actually appreciated my expertise. I'd never have to see my father again, never have to explain to strangers why my own family erased me, never have to carry the weight of my mother's death anymore. I was tired. So tired of being alone, of fighting, of being the crazy one, the difficult one, the one nobody believed. The money wouldn't bring my mother back. It wouldn't put my father in prison. But it would let me breathe. My hand moved to my purse. I had a pen. I'd known I might need one. Robert saw the movement and leaned back slightly, the hint of satisfaction crossing his face. He thought he'd won. He'd done this before, worn someone down, made capitulation look like wisdom, made surrender feel like choice. I pulled out the pen, uncapped it, set it on the table next to the contract. "Did you love her?" I asked. "Even a little?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, too honest to be calculated. Then it was gone, his expression resettling into that same professional neutrality. "Sign the contract, Olivia." Not yes. Not, "Of course I loved your mother." Not even, "That's irrelevant." Just, "Sign the contract." That non-answer told me everything. He hadn't loved her. Maybe at first when she was useful, brilliant, driven, the perfect partner to help build a company, but not at the end when she'd become an obstacle to whatever he wanted more. Not enough to hesitate to reconsider, to choose her life over his ambition. And he would do the same thing to me if I let him. Reduce me to a transaction, a problem solved with a check and a signature. Erase me more completely than he already had, this time with my own cooperation. I picked up the pen and Robert's shoulders relaxed slightly. Then I set it back down. I pushed the contract across the table back to his side and met his eyes. "I'll see you at the wedding." For the first time since I'd walked into this restaurant, Robert's composure cracked. Just slightly, a tightening around his mouth, a tension in his jaw. He'd been certain I would fold. He'd done everything right, applied the perfect amount of pressure, made the logical choice clear. And I was choosing differently anyway. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." I stood, leaving the untouched fish, the barely touched salad. Robert remained seated, staring at the contract between us. As I walked out of Marchand's, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, maybe years. Not confidence exactly, not certainty that I would win, but certainty that I had to try. I went straight from the restaurant to an office supply store and bought a box of heavy-duty folders, a ream of premium paper, and 20 USB drives. At home, I cleared my dining table and began assembling the packets. The executive summary came first. 2 pages, single-spaced, written in the most neutral language I could manage. Timeline of events: Maria Chen Powell, 1987 to 1991. I listed facts in chronological order: incorporation of Powell Industries, with 50% ownership split between Robert and Maria's hospital admissions, with dates and documented symptoms, the death certificate showing August 3rd as date of death. Maria's diary entries continuing through August 19th, proving she was alive 2 weeks after the official date, the will leaving everything to Olivia Powell that was never probated. Then the questions phrased carefully to avoid accusations. Why was Maria Powell's 50% ownership of Powell Industries never mentioned in estate proceedings? Why do death certificate dates conflict with medical diary entries? Why were nursing staff concerns about poisoning symptoms dismissed by attending physicians? No emotion, no claims of murder, just facts and questions that any reasonable person would want answered. Next, I organized the supporting documents, copies of the incorporation papers with Maria's signature, typed excerpts from her medical diary. I'd transcribed the handwritten pages into clean text because her handwriting deteriorated toward the end, becoming nearly illegible as her symptoms worsened. Dorothy's signed and notarized affidavit describing what she witnessed at the hospital. photocopies of the nursing notes and medical charts, side-by-side comparison of the death certificate and diary entries showing the timeline impossibility. I included photographs of the original documents to prove authenticity, the actual leather-bound diary, the yellowed incorporation papers, the sealed vial of hair. Everything scanned and saved to USB drives as backup. I printed 20 complete packets. Security might confiscate some, guests might refuse to take them, but I wanted enough copies that at least a few would make it into the right hands. The next morning, I called the Ritz-Carlton where the wedding was being held. "This is Olivia Powell. I'm confirming my attendance and wanted to notify you of dietary restrictions." The event coordinator pulled up her list. "Yes, Ms. Powell, you're on the guest list. Table 17. Do you have any food allergies we should know about? No tree nuts, please." "I'll make a note. We're looking forward to seeing you Saturday." So the invitation was still valid. They hadn't removed me. Either an oversight or they were confident their security measures would handle me. I went shopping for a dress. Not the dramatic red or black that screamed for attention. I chose a navy blue floor-length gown with cap sleeves and minimal embellishment. It was elegant enough to fit in with high society guests, but forgettable. I wanted to blend in until the moment I chose not to. Harold Chen called that afternoon. "You're really doing this?" "I am. I'll have my phone on all evening. If you need legal support or if you're arrested, call me immediately." His voice was steady but concerned. "I've also prepared a statement explaining my role as Maria's attorney and confirming the authenticity of the documents in case you need it." "Thank you, Harold," Dorothy called an hour later. "My daughter thinks I'm crazy for getting involved. She says I should stay out of it, that I've already done my part by giving you the records." "She might be right." "She is right, but I'm doing it anyway. I'll have my phone on Saturday night. If you need me to verify anything, or if anyone wants to speak to me directly, I'll be available." I contacted James Ortega through his podcast's website, explaining I had information about a 34-year-old suspicious death that might interest him. He responded within hours asking for details. I told him I'd provide everything at a wedding on Saturday at the Ritz-Carlton, and that if he could attend, he'd witness something significant. "I don't have an invitation," he wrote back. "I checked the guest list. Councilman Richards is attending. You interviewed him last month for your series on municipal corruption. Asked to be his +1 for a story you're working on. You've done your homework. I learned from the best." I didn't tell Ethan my full plan. He'd proven he would help quietly but wouldn't risk himself publicly. Instead, I sent him a simple text. "I'll be at the wedding. Thank you for everything." His response came 20 minutes later. "I know what you're planning. Be careful." That was as close to a goodbye as we'd get. What I didn't know, what I could only piece together later from overheard conversations and Maddie's accidental admissions, was that my family was preparing too. Robert hired Executive Protection Services, the same company whose SUV had followed me. 4 additional security personnel would be stationed at the wedding with specific instructions to monitor me and quietly escort me out if I caused any disruption. They were briefed that I might be experiencing a mental health crisis and should be handled with care but removed efficiently. Helen made another call to Dr. Zhao. Would he be available Saturday evening, just in case? Could he come to the Ritz-Carlton if needed to provide professional assessment of a patient experiencing an acute episode? Dr. Zhao, apparently comfortable with this arrangement, agreed to be on standby. Maddie was told only that I might try to make a scene, and that she should remain calm, stay with Ethan, and let security handle it. Helen assured her it would all be managed discreetly and wouldn't ruin her special day. They'd also prepared a statement for the press just in case word got out. I'd see it later leaked by someone sympathetic to my cause. The Powell family is dealing with a difficult family situation involving a member struggling with mental health challenges. We ask for privacy and understanding as we support our loved one through this crisis. We're grateful to our friends and community for their compassion during this personal matter. Framing me as the victim, they were trying to help themselves as the long-suffering family coping with a troubled daughter. It was masterful. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold. I woke at 6, too nervous to sleep longer. The packets were stacked on my kitchen counter, 20 identical folders ready to deploy. My dress hung on the closet door. My phone was fully charged. At 9:30, my phone buzzed with a text. "Maddie. Please don't come. I'm begging you. Just this once, let me have this day." I stared at the message for a long time. She sounded genuinely desperate, not angry. Maybe she really didn't know the full scope of what our parents had done. Maybe she was just a woman who wanted her wedding day to be perfect, who'd been told her unstable sister might cause problems. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the truth. "I'm sorry, but I have to do this." Her reply was immediate. "Then I'll never forgive you." I set the phone down and started getting ready. I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton at exactly 4:30 minutes before the ceremony. The valet took my car and I walked through the marble lobby with my small clutch purse in hand, my navy dress swishing quietly against my legs. I'd chosen low heels, elegant but practical. I needed to be able to move quickly if necessary. The chapel was on the 2nd floor. A security guard in a dark suit stood at the entrance checking invitations. Not typical for a wedding, but then again, this wasn't a typical situation. Name: Olivia Powell. He consulted his tablet, found my name, checked my face against whatever photo they had on file. "You're on the list. Table 17. He gestured to a young woman in a headset. "Can you check Ms. Powell's bag, please?" The woman asked me to open my clutch. I did, showing her the contents: car keys, phone, lipstick, a tissue. Nothing suspicious. She nodded and waved me through. The document packets were already inside, exactly where I'd arranged for them to be. 3 days ago, I'd mailed a package to the venue coordinator addressed to Olivia Powell, Co-Wright Powell Wedding, Ritz-Carlton Events Office. The label said, "Seating chart materials, hold for guest pickup." I'd called yesterday to confirm they'd received it and would have it available. They had. I entered the chapel. It was stunning, all white roses and candlelight gauzy fabric draped from the ceiling, a string quartet playing something classical in the corner. Heads turned as I walked down the side aisle. I recognized faces from the disastrous dinner at the Wright's house, from society pages, from the research I'd done on the guest list. They recognized me too. The whispers started immediately. The Powells were seated in the front row on the left side, reserved for the bride's family. Robert saw me first. I watched him lean toward Helen, say something brief. Helen's head turned sharply, and her eyes found me. She immediately raised her hand in a subtle gesture, and I saw 2 security guards shift position, moving to flank the exits. I didn't approach them. I didn't do anything except walk calmly to my assigned seat in the back row, far from the family, and sit down. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Other guests filtered in, finding their seats, still glancing back at me occasionally. I kept my expression neutral, pleasant even. I wasn't here to cause a scene. Not yet. At exactly 5 o'clock, the music changed. Everyone stood. Maddie appeared at the back of the chapel on my father's arm. She was beautiful. I could acknowledge that objectively, even through everything else I felt. Her dress was ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. She'd clearly been crying earlier. I could see the slight puffiness around her eyes, despite the makeup. But she was smiling now as she looked down the aisle at Ethan. Robert walked her forward with perfect patriarchal grace, every inch the proud father giving away his beloved daughter. When they reached the altar, the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" And Robert's voice rang out clear and strong. "Her mother and I do. Not her family, not we do, just him and Helen, the only parents who mattered in the official narrative." I watched Ethan's face as Maddie reached him. He looked genuinely happy, or at least he was performing happiness well. When his eyes scanned the audience, they passed over me without acknowledgement. We'd already said our goodbyes. The ceremony proceeded with all the traditional elements. Readings about love and commitment, vows that Maddie and Ethan had written themselves, full of promises to support each other, to be honest, to build a life together. I listened without reaction. The irony of promising honesty in front of Robert Powell wasn't lost on me, but I didn't smile, didn't show any emotion that could be read as inappropriate. Throughout the entire ceremony, I was perfectly still, meditative almost. Other guests kept turning to look at me, waiting for me to do something, but I gave them nothing. I didn't cry during the emotional moments. I didn't fidget. I just sat, hands folded, watching. Helen couldn't take her eyes off me. I could see her in my peripheral vision, turned halfway around in her seat, monitoring me constantly. She was stressed, her shoulders were tense, her smile tight. But she couldn't do anything without causing the very disruption she was trying to prevent. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Ethan kissed Maddie. Everyone applauded. I stood with the rest of the guests and applauded too, my face neutral and appropriate. The wedding party recessed back down the aisle. As Maddie passed my row, she looked directly at me. Our eyes met for just a second. She looked terrified. Then she was past smiling at other guests, and I was just another face in the crowd. The guests began moving toward the reception hall for cocktail hour. I waited until the initial rush had passed, then walked to the events office on the 3rd floor. The coordinator, a harried-looking woman in her 40s, found my package immediately. "Ms. Powell, yes, here you go. Hope these help with whatever you're working on." "Thank you so much." I carried the box to a service hallway, opened it, and removed all 20 packets. They fit easily in my larger evening bag that I'd left in my car specifically for this purpose. I'd retrieved it from the valet on my way up. Every detail planned. By the time I returned to the cocktail hour, it was in full swing. The reception hall was elegant round tables with white linens and tall centerpieces, a dance floor, a bar in each corner, servers circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to circulate. I didn't rush toward my targets. I didn't make a beeline for Thomas Wright or Pauline Chen or James Ortega. Instead, I moved through the crowd like any other guest, making small talk, smiling, being pleasant. When someone I vaguely recognized from a charity event asked how I knew the couple, I said, "Maddie's my sister." "Oh, I didn't realize she had a sister." "I keep a low profile. I'm not much for the social scene, too busy with work." "What do you do?" "Financial analysis. Nothing as exciting as this." I gestured to the elaborate decorations. The woman laughed and moved on. No drama, no confrontation, just normal wedding conversation. This was clearly confusing the Powells. I could see Robert watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable. Helen tried to intercept me twice, appearing at my elbow with that practiced maternal smile. "Olivia, can we talk for a moment?" "I'm here to celebrate Maddie," I said pleasantly. "Let's not make this about us." "I just think, Helen, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Enjoy the evening." I moved away before she could press further. She couldn't force me into a private conversation without making a scene, and that was the last thing she wanted. Robert signaled to security guards but then waved them off. I wasn't doing anything that warranted removal. I was behaving exactly like an appropriate wedding guest. Removing me now would only draw attention and raise questions. The Powells were off balance, and I knew why. They'd prepared for me to be emotional, erratic, confrontational. They'd expected me to march in and start making accusations to give them an excuse to paint me as unstable and have me removed. Instead, I was calm, controlled, and playing by all the social rules they'd written. A chime sounded, and the event coordinator announced that dinner was being served and guests should find their seats. People began drifting toward the main dining room. I saw Thomas Wright across the room, standing with his wife Margaret and another couple. He was laughing at something, relaxed, enjoying himself. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of the packets. Navy blue folder, professional, innocuous looking. Then I walked directly toward him. I crossed the room with measured steps, the packet held casually at my side. Thomas Wright saw me approaching and smiled politely, the smile of someone who doesn't yet know they're about to have their evening destroyed. "Mr. and Mrs. Wright," I said quietly, formally positioning myself so my back was to most of the room. "I know this is unconventional timing, but I believe you deserve to see these documents before your families become legally joined." I held out the Navy folder. Thomas took it reflexively, his expression shifting to confusion. "This contains information about my mother, Maria Powell, her ownership stake in Powell Industries, and the circumstances of her death in 1991. I'm not asking you to do anything. Just read it when you have a moment." I turned and walked away before they could respond, before they could ask questions or hand it back. I heard Margaret say, "What is this?" But I didn't turn around. I moved toward table 12, where Pauline Chen sat with 3 other members of the Philanthropic Foundation board. She was mid-conversation, gesturing with her wine glass, laughing at something. She looked up as I approached. "Ms. Chen," I said, extending another packet. "I apologize for the interruption. I have some documents I think you'll find relevant to your work with the foundation." Pauline recognized me from the Wright family dinner. Her smile faltered slightly, but she was too polished to be rude. "Oh, Olivia, isn't it?" What kind of documents? Historical records about Powell Industries' founding and some questions about financial transparency. Given Robert Powell's role on your board, I thought you should see them. I placed the packet in front of her and walked away before the conversation could develop. Professional, factual, leaving her curious enough to open it. James Ortega was harder to spot. He'd come as someone's +1 and wasn't on the official seating chart I'd memorized. But I'd studied his photo from his podcast website, and I found him at table 19, partially obscured by a centerpiece. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, wearing a suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on him. A journalist, not a socialite. I approached from his side. "Mr. Ortega." He looked up immediately, wary. Journalists developed instincts about when they were being pitched a story. "I'm Olivia Powell. I reached out to you this week about a suspicious death. This is everything I mentioned." I handed him the packet. "You'll want to verify independently before publishing anything. I've included contact information for 2 witnesses who can corroborate." He took the packet, his eyes sharp and analytical. "You're doing this here at your sister's wedding. Everyone who needs to see this is in one room, including you." He didn't open the packet, too professional for that. But he didn't set it aside either. He tucked it under his arm with a small nod that might have been respect or might have been acknowledgement. Either way, I'd done what I came to do. I moved back toward the bar, ordered a sparkling water, and waited. It took less than 30 seconds. I saw Thomas Wright open the folder. Margaret was leaning over his shoulder, reading the executive summary. I watched Thomas's face change confusion first, then focus as he started reading more carefully. His hand went to the second page of the timeline. His eyes scanned down to the death certificate copy, then back up to the diary excerpts. His face went pale. Margaret pulled out the corporate documents, the ones showing Maria's 50% ownership. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked up across the room directly at Robert Powell. Her expression was no longer polite or warm. It was cold, evaluative, and completely betrayed. At table 12, Pauline Chen had opened her packet. I saw the exact moment she got to the diary excerpts. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed suspended there. She set it down carefully, pulled the documents closer, and started reading with the focused intensity of someone who investigated financial impropriety for a living. Guests were starting to notice something was wrong. Conversations quieted. People turned to see what Thomas and Margaret Wright were looking at so intently. Then Margaret stood up, not abruptly, but with purpose. She walked directly across the reception hall toward the Powell family table, the packet still in her hand. Every eye in the room followed her. She stopped beside Robert Powell's chair. "We need to speak. Privately. Now." Robert looked up at her, his expression carefully neutral, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. He knew. He stood, glanced once in my direction with an expression I couldn't quite read, and followed Margaret toward the hallway outside the reception hall. Thomas Wright was right behind them, and through the glass doors separating the hallway from the reception, everyone could see what happened next. Margaret holding up documents pointing at specific lines. Robert's hands raised in a placating gesture. Thomas stepping between them, his body language protective of his wife and confrontational toward Robert. The entire reception hall had gone nearly silent, everyone watching the scene unfold through those glass doors. Helen started to rise from her seat, but before she could move toward the hallway, Pauline Chen was standing, walking directly to the Powell table with her packet open. "Helen?" Pauline's voice carried across the suddenly quiet room, pitched just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear clearly. "Can you explain why Maria Powell's name was removed from all Powell Industries founding documents after her death?" "According to these incorporation papers, she owned 50% of the company." Helen's face went rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about. These are public records, notarized. They show Maria Chen Powell as co-founder with equal equity to Robert Powell in 1987. Yet when the company went through its 1993 restructuring, her name was completely absent from all documentation. Where did her shares go?" Nearby guests were leaning in, listening openly now. The pretense of polite privacy had evaporated. At the head table, Maddie stood up, her wedding dress rustling. "What's going on? Where's Ethan's parents? Why is everyone—" She looked around wildly, saw her mother being publicly questioned, saw her father in the hallway in what was clearly an argument, saw guests whispering and staring. Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her arm, but I could see he genuinely didn't know what was happening. I hadn't told him specifics. He was learning, along with everyone else. That's when Robert came back into the reception hall. His composed mask had cracked. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled from running his hand through it, his face tight with barely controlled anger. He walked directly to the microphone at the front of the room, the one that had been set up for toasts. He tapped it once, and the sound system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the room, too loud, slightly distorted. "I apologize, but we need to pause the reception briefly. There's been a misunderstanding." Robert stood at the microphone, and every person in that room turned to face him. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie with one hand, and when he spoke again, his voice had regained some of its commanding quality. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. What you're witnessing is a family member distributing false information due to ongoing mental health struggles. We've tried to handle this privately to protect Olivia's dignity, but—" "Robert," Thomas Wright's voice cut through the room like a blade. He was walking toward the microphone not quickly but with absolute purpose. "I've just reviewed documents that suggest your late wife owned 50% of your company and that her shares were never properly probated. I think we need to discuss this privately with attorneys before we proceed any further with this wedding." The room erupted in whispers. This wasn't Olivia making accusations that could be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable daughter. This was Thomas Wright, president of Wright Holdings, pillar of the business community. A man whose word carried the same weight as Robert Powell's, publicly questioning the legitimacy of Powell Industries' ownership structure. Robert's face went rigid. "Thomas, if we could discuss this later." "I don't think we can." Thomas's voice was hard now, all the earlier warmth gone. "These documents are notarized. They're dated. They show a 50-50 partnership that somehow became 100% yours after Maria's death. If this is legitimate, you can explain it. If it's not, my family needs to know before my son legally binds himself to yours." Margaret Wright had joined her husband, standing beside him with her arms crossed. The unified front of the Wright family withdrawing their approval. Their acceptance, their alliance was visible to everyone in the room. At the head table, Maddie was standing now, her hands pressed flat against the white tablecloth. "What is happening, Ethan? What are they talking about?" Ethan's face was pale, but when he spoke, he didn't lie to her. "Your father has been lying about Olivia, probably about other things too." "That's not true. He wouldn't—" Maddie's voice was rising, becoming shrill. Helen stood then, smoothing her dress, putting on the performance of concerned matriarch one more time. She addressed the room with that same practiced maternal warmth she'd used at the Wright family dinner. "Please, everyone, let me explain. Olivia is my daughter, and I love her. But she's been struggling since childhood with creating false narratives, with seeking attention through dramatic stories. We've tried to get her help. We've tried to protect her privacy, but she's chosen to do this publicly, and now—" "That's not true." The voice came from the back of the room, clear, firm, belonging to a small woman in her late 60s wearing a blue cardigan. Dorothy Martinez stood up from table 23, where I'd arranged for her to be seated. She looked tiny in that grand room, but her voice carried perfectly. "My name is Dorothy Martinez. I'm a retired registered nurse. I cared for Maria Powell at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital before her death in 1991. She paused, letting that sink in. Maria Powell did not die in a car accident like the death certificate claims. She died slowly over several weeks from symptoms consistent with heavy metal poisoning. I documented those symptoms. I reported my concerns to the attending physician and to hospital administration. I was told to keep quiet or face disciplinary action." The room had gone completely, utterly silent. You could have heard a champagne flute hit the carpet. Dorothy continued, her voice steady. "I'm willing to testify to everything I witnessed. I have 34 years of nursing notes. I kept them because I knew someday someone would ask the right questions." Helen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. There was no response she could make that wouldn't confirm what Dorothy was saying, or make her look like she was attacking an elderly nurse. She sat down slowly, her performance of maternal concern completely shattered. Maddie's hands were shaking. She was looking around the room wildly at her parents, at the Wrights, at the 200 guests who were now staring at her family with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to avid curiosity. Then she turned and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd entered the reception hall. "You did this," she said, her voice trembling. "You did this on my wedding day." I stood where I was near the bar and met her eyes. "You ruined everything." Maddie's voice cracked, growing louder. She was crying now, mascara starting to run. "You've always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand that. I have what you don't, a family that loves me, a beautiful wedding, a perfect life. You had to destroy it because you're bitter and alone and pathetic." Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. Every person in that room was watching us. I spoke quietly, but the acoustics carried my voice perfectly. "I'm not jealous of you, Maddie. I pity you. You built your entire life on their lies and now you're watching it collapse. That's not my fault. That's theirs." The truth of it hit her visibly like a physical blow. She looked at Helen, at Robert, as if waiting for them to deny it, to explain, to fix this the way they'd always fixed everything for her. They said nothing. Ethan stepped toward Maddie, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go somewhere private." She shoved him away hard enough that he stumbled. "Don't touch me. This is your fault too. You invited her, you knew she would do this." "Maddie, I didn't." But she was already running, her wedding dress bunched in her hands, sobbing as she fled the reception hall. Several bridesmaids scrambled up to follow her, their own faces shocked and confused. The spell broke. Guests began standing, gathering purses and jackets, making excuses in low voices. No one was going to stay for dinner now. No one wanted to be associated with what they'd just witnessed. Robert tried once more. "Please, everyone, if you'll just let me explain." But Thomas Wright had already turned his back and was walking toward the exit with Margaret. Other guests followed, a steady stream of people leaving. Some glanced at Robert and Helen with something like pity, but most just avoided eye contact, entirely unwilling to be caught in the blast radius of the Powell family's implosion. Within 5 minutes, half the room had cleared. The remaining guests were mostly people too curious to leave, or those frantically texting friends who'd already gone, trying to figure out what was happening. Robert and Helen stood together near the head table, isolated in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. People moved around them, but not toward them. No one offered comfort or asked questions. The social death I'd been aiming for was happening in real time. I set my untouched sparkling water on the bar and walked toward the exit. I was almost to the door when someone fell into step beside me. Ethan. He didn't look at me directly, just walked alongside me toward the lobby. When we were out of earshot of the remaining guests, he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry I couldn't be braver, but thank you for being brave enough for both of us." I stopped walking and looked at him. His wedding day had just imploded. His bride had run away crying. His parents had withdrawn their blessing. And he was thanking me. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," I said. "I'm not." He glanced back toward the reception hall. "She deserves better than to marry into a family built on murder and lies, even if she doesn't see it yet." He paused. "And I deserved to know the truth before I made that commitment." He extended his hand. I shook it. "Good luck, Olivia, with whatever comes next." "You too." I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton into the cold evening air and got my car from the valet. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. I'd bet money that James Ortega was fact-checking everything in that packet right now, and Pauline Chen was calling an emergency board meeting. But I didn't check my phone yet. I just drove home, parked in my building's garage, and rode the elevator up to my apartment. I'd done what I came to do. Now I had to see what happened next. I woke up Sunday morning to 47 missed calls and 83 text messages. I made coffee and started going through them, systematically deleting most without reading. Maddie had called 16 times between midnight and 3 a.m. I blocked her number. Helen had left voicemails that I deleted without listening. Robert hadn't contacted me at all, which told me more than any message could have. The first text I actually read was from Harold Chen, sent at 6:30 a.m. "Ortega's article is live. Brace yourself." I opened my laptop and found it immediately top story on the city's most read news website. The headline was perfect. "The woman who didn't exist questions surround Powell Industries founder's death." James Ortega had done exactly what I'd hoped. He'd fact-checked everything, verified the documents with independent experts, and presented it all without sensationalism. The article laid out the timeline discrepancies between the death certificate and Maria's diary entries. It included scanned images of the incorporation documents showing her 50% ownership. It quoted Dorothy Martinez on the record about the suppressed poisoning concerns. It noted that hospital records from St. Catherine's Memorial had been destroyed when the facility closed, making independent verification impossible. But critically, it never accused Robert Powell of murder. It simply asked questions. Why was Maria Powell's ownership stake never mentioned in probate proceedings? Why were nursing staff concerns about poisoning dismissed? Why has this story remained buried for 34 years? The comments section was already exploding. People I'd never heard of were weighing in, sharing the article, tagging the philanthropic boards Robert served on. By noon, it had 15,000 shares. By Monday morning, the Metropolitan Philanthropic Foundation issued a statement. Robert Powell has stepped down from our board of directors to focus on family matters. We thank him for his years of service and wish his family privacy during this difficult time. The phrasing was diplomatic, but everyone understood what it meant. They'd forced him out. By Monday afternoon, 3 more boards followed: the Children's Hospital Foundation, the Arts Council, the Business Development Alliance. All the same carefully worded statements. All the same message: Robert Powell was no longer welcome in the circles where he'd built his power. These weren't criminal penalties. He wouldn't go to prison, he wouldn't be prosecuted. But for someone whose entire identity was built on social standing and reputation, this was devastation of a different kind. Harold Chen called Tuesday morning. Have you seen the rights statement? What statement? Check the society pages. I found it in the wedding announcements section, or rather in the place where the Wright Powell wedding announcement should have been. Instead, there was a brief notice: the Wright and Powell families request privacy as they address certain family matters that have recently come to light. The marriage license filing has been postponed pending resolution of these issues. It was phrased politely, but it was a public withdrawal. Thomas Wright was creating a holding pattern where the marriage couldn't be legally completed without outright canceling it, which would have been too dramatic, too much of a public rebuke. This way he maintained plausible deniability while effectively ending the union. I learned later through social media posts from people who knew Maddie's friends that Ethan had supported his parents' decision. He'd told Maddie they needed to wait until all the family history is sorted out. The Wrights had also withdrawn their offer to fund the honeymoon to the Maldives and the down payment on the townhouse in Briarcliff Heights. Maddie had reportedly locked herself in her parents' house and refused to speak to anyone. The wedding photos were never released to the society pages. $200,000 worth of professional photography gathering digital dust because no one wanted those images associated with them anymore. On Tuesday afternoon, a courier arrived at my apartment with a thick legal envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Whitmore & Associates attorneys at law on behalf of Robert Powell. The letter was exactly what I'd expected: threatening, aggressive, full of legal language about defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It demanded that I, James Ortega, and Dorothy Martinez immediately cease making false and defamatory statements about Robert Powell and the circumstances of Maria Powell's death. It threatened legal action if we continued to publish or distribute the fabricated documents and conspiracy theories. I photographed it and sent it to Harold Chen. He called back within 10 minutes, laughing. Actually laughing. This is the weakest legal threat I've seen in 40 years of practice. They're not filing suit, Olivia. This is all bluster. How do you know? Because if they filed an actual defamation lawsuit, they'd trigger the discovery process. That means depositions under oath. That means subpoenas for Powell Industries' complete financial records. That means Robert would have to testify about what happened to Maria's shares, about the circumstances of her death, about why he intercepted my letters to you. Everything he's tried to bury would be dragged into public court filings. So this is just for show. Exactly. It's so he can tell people he fought back legally. But anyone with legal sophistication will recognize this for what it is: a desperate attempt to look strong while actually being terrified of real litigation. Chen paused. The fact that he hired Whitmore & Associates tells me everything. They're a crisis management firm, not trial attorneys. They write scary letters and manage press releases. They don't go to court. I filed the cease and desist letter in my growing folder of Powell family documents and went back to monitoring the fallout. By Wednesday, 5 days after the wedding, the story had spread beyond our city. Regional business journals were picking it up. A podcast about corporate fraud requested an interview with Dorothy Martinez. Someone created a Wikipedia page for Maria Chen Powell that actually acknowledged her existence and contribution to Powell Industries. Robert's carefully constructed narrative, the self-made businessman, the devoted father, the philanthropic pillar of the community, was unraveling thread by thread. I didn't feel triumphant. Triumph implied I'd wanted this fight, that I'd enjoyed it. I hadn't. But I did feel something like relief. The truth was out. People knew. They might not believe all of it, might not care enough to demand legal justice, but they knew. And in the social circles the Powells had spent decades cultivating knowledge was its own form of judgment. Wednesday evening. Exactly 1 week after the wedding, I was making dinner when an email appeared in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize, rmoss@mossstatelaw.com. The subject line read, Estate of Maria Chen Powell. I opened it. Ms. Powell, my name is Rebecca Moss. I'm an estate and probate attorney based in the city. I've been following recent news coverage regarding your mother, Maria Chen Powell, and the circumstances of her death. Based on the documentation that's now public record, I believe you may be the rightful heir to a substantial estate that was never properly probated. I'd like to discuss your legal options. Please call my office at your earliest convenience to schedule a consultation. This matter is time-sensitive. I read it 3 times. All this time I'd been focused on exposing the truth, on destroying my father's reputation, on making sure people knew what he'd done. I hadn't seriously considered the financial implications, the fact that my mother's 50% of Powell Industries had real monetary value, that her estate had legal standing, that I might actually be entitled to something beyond moral vindication. I forwarded the email to Harold Chen with a single question, is this legitimate? His response came back within minutes. Rebecca Moss is one of the best estate attorneys in the state. If she's reaching out, she sees a viable case. Call her tomorrow. This could change everything. I called Rebecca Moss's office Thursday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Her assistant put me through immediately. Miss Powell, thank you for calling. I'm sure you have questions. I have several. Starting with why you're contacting me now. Rebecca's voice was professional, crisp, the voice of someone who billed by the hour and didn't waste words. I've been reviewing the documentation that's become public through Mr. Ortega's reporting and through filings in various civil matters. Your mother's will, the incorporation documents showing her 50% ownership, the fact that no probate proceeding was ever filed, this creates a clear case for an unclaimed estate. After 34 years? There's no statute of limitations on estate claims in this state if fraud is involved, and the deliberate concealment of Maria's ownership stake could be argued as fraud. Based on current valuations of Powell Industries, approximately $45 million, your mother's half would be worth $22.5 million, possibly more, with accumulated growth and dividends over 3 decades. $22 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, unreal. What would pursuing this look like? I asked. Rebecca didn't sugarcoat it. We'd file a civil suit in probate court to reopen Maria's estate and challenge the current ownership structure of Powell Industries. The litigation would take years, minimum 2, possibly 5 or more, if they appeal at every stage. Legal fees would run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly crossing $1 million if it goes to trial. The Powells would fight viciously because they're fighting for the company itself. She paused and I heard papers shuffling on her end. They'll attack your character, suggesting you're pursuing this out of greed or mental instability. They'll question your mother's mental state when she wrote the will, try to prove she wasn't of sound mind. They'll challenge every document's authenticity, force Harold Chen and Dorothy Martinez through brutal depositions, and drag your mother's medical history through public court filings. You'd win eventually, the documentation is strong, but the process would be brutal. I'd expected this, but hearing it laid out so clearly made the reality sink in. So you're saying I shouldn't pursue it? I'm saying you should understand what you're choosing. This money is rightfully yours, but getting it would cost you years of your life and significant emotional resources. I told her I needed time to think, and ended the call. For 3 days, I did nothing but think. I pulled out my mother's diary, read through her will. Again looked at the incorporation documents. $22 million would change my life completely. I could quit my job, travel, buy a house, never worry about money again. But I'd spend years in courtrooms. Years having lawyers dissect my mother's mental state, question whether she really loved me enough to leave me. Everything insinuate that I'd manipulated a dying woman. Years watching Dorothy Martinez, who'd already risked so much, get torn apart on cross-examination about her memory, her motivations, her nursing notes from 3 decades ago. Years living under the shadow of Robert Powell's legal machinery, having every relationship scrutinized, every employer contacted, every aspect of my life weaponized in depositions. The money was mine legally. But did I want to spend the next 5 years fighting for it? On Sunday, I called Rebecca back. "I have a counter-proposal," I said. "I'll settle for $5 million, one payment, no structured payout. In exchange, Robert Powell signs a public statement acknowledging that Maria Chen Powell was co-founder of Powell Industries with equal ownership and that her contributions have not been adequately recognized in company history." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "That's significantly less than you're entitled to." "I know. But it's enough to change my life, and I get it now instead of in 5 years. And the public statement is what matters. It corrects the record, forces him to acknowledge her, puts her name back in the company history where it belongs. And you're not requiring any admission of wrongdoing regarding her death." "No, that fight is over. He's already lost socially. I don't need a legal admission when everyone who matters already knows what he did." I could hear Rebecca typing, already drafting the proposal in her head. The settlement would include standard confidentiality provisions and a release of all claims. Standard provisions are fine, but I want the public statement published on Powell Industries' website and filed with the state business registry. It has to be permanent and searchable. "I'll draft the proposal and send it to Powell's attorneys today. My guess is they'll accept within 48 hours. She was wrong. They accepted within 24. Robert's attorney called Rebecca on Monday afternoon with a counter that was barely a counter. They wanted the public statement to specify "at the time of founding" regarding Maria's contributions to avoid implying she contributed after her death. Rebecca agreed. By Tuesday morning, we had a signed settlement agreement. $5 million wired to an escrow account within 10 business days. In exchange, I signed away all claims to Powell Industries, past, present, and future. No admission of wrongdoing, no criminal implications, just money and a public correction of the historical record. The statement went live on Powell Industries' website Wednesday morning. Powell Industries acknowledges that Maria Chen Powell was co-founder of this company in 1987 with equal ownership and equity. Her contributions to our early technological innovations and business development were significant and have not been adequately recognized in company histories. We regret this omission and are committed to ensuring her legacy is properly documented going forward. It was carefully worded, lawyered within an inch of its life, but it was there, permanent, searchable. Anyone Googling Powell Industries would now see Maria's name. Anyone researching company history would find her acknowledged as co-founder. Robert Powell could never again claim to be a self-made man without someone pointing out his wife built half of it. Harold Chen called when the wire transfer cleared. "Your mother would be proud." "Would she?" "I took a fraction of what she left me." "You took enough to be free, and you forced him to acknowledge her. That's not settling. That's strategy." His voice softened. "And you did it in weeks, not years. You get to live your life now, Olivia. That's worth more than any amount of money." I used part of the settlement to pay Harold's legal fees for all the work he'd done over the decades maintaining the trust and the safe deposit box. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. I paid Dorothy's moving expenses to Arizona and set up a small trust to help with her medical costs. I paid Rebecca's fees and James Ortega's investigative expenses for the article. Then I sat in my apartment with $4,600,000 in my bank account and no idea what to do next. I felt relieved, vindicated even. My mother's name was public record now. Robert had lost his boards, his reputation, his carefully constructed image. Maddie's wedding had collapsed. The truth was out. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The money didn't bring my mother back. The public statement didn't undo 34 years of lies. The settlement didn't put Robert in prison or make him confess or give me the childhood I should have had. It was justice of a kind. But justice turned out to be quieter and more complicated than I'd imagined. Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the settlement finalized, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Hand-addressed, no return address, postmarked from Connecticut. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Maddie. I carried it upstairs, set it on my kitchen counter, and stared at it for 10 minutes before I opened it. The letter was written on heavy cream stationery, the kind you bought at expensive stationery stores for important correspondence. Maddie's handwriting was neat, controlled, each line perfectly straight. It began, "You destroyed my wedding, my engagement, and my relationship with my parents. I hope you're satisfied." I read the first line and had to set the letter down, hands shaking. After several deep breaths, I picked it back up and forced myself to continue. "You destroyed my wedding, my engagement, my relationship with my parents, and my reputation. Everyone looks at me now like I'm complicit in something I knew nothing about. Ethan won't speak to me, won't return my calls, won't even look at me when we pass each other in public. His family treats me like I'm contaminated, like association with me will taint them by proxy." The handwriting stayed perfectly controlled, but I could feel the rage underneath each carefully formed letter. "I lost everything because you needed to be right. Because you couldn't stand that I had what you didn't, a family that loved me, a beautiful wedding, a future. You had to destroy it all to prove some point about something that happened when I was 3 years old. Something I had nothing to do with." She was right about that part, at least. Maddie had been 3 when our mother died. She couldn't have known what happened, couldn't have participated in any conspiracy. She'd simply inherited the narrative our parents fed her and built her life on it. "Do you know what it's like?" the letter continued, walking into a room and watching conversations stop. "Having friends suddenly become unavailable. Seeing people whisper and point. That article is the first thing that comes up when anyone searches my name now. Not my art, not my charity work. Just daughter of suspected murderer." I winced at that. I hadn't thought about how the association would follow her, how my truth-telling would become her burden too. "You could have taken the money and left quietly. Dad offered you $3 million to walk away. That's more money than most people see in a lifetime. You could have moved across the country, started fresh, never spoken to us again. You would have gotten what you wanted, freedom from us, and I would have had my wedding day." Her argument was logical in its way. The settlement would have solved my financial problems. I could have disappeared and never looked back. "But you chose revenge over family. You chose to humiliate us in front of 200 people, to destroy my one perfect day, to ruin my relationship with the man I love. You could have let me have one perfect day, Olivia. Just one. But you chose this." The word family hit hardest. In Maddie's mind, we were family, dysfunctional, complicated, but still connected by blood and history. In mine, they'd stopped being family the moment they erased me from existence. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I deserved this because I benefited from Mom and Dad's lies, because I lived a privileged life while you were excluded. But I didn't choose that. I was a child. I didn't ask to be the favorite. I didn't ask them to treat you the way they did. And I didn't deserve to have my entire life destroyed because of choices they made before I could even remember. She wasn't entirely wrong. Maddie had benefited from our parents' cruelty toward me, but she hadn't orchestrated it. She'd been shaped by it, molded into their perfect daughter, but she hadn't chosen that role any more than I'd chosen to be erased. The letter's final lines were the cruelest, delivered with surgical precision. "I hope your truth was worth it, Olivia. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you have no one left, because that's what you have now, your truth and your money and your vindication. And absolutely no one who loves you. Congratulations on your victory." She didn't sign it, your sister, or even Maddie. Just her full signature, formal and final, Madison Powell. I set the letter on the counter and stared at it for a long time. She was right that I'd destroyed her wedding. Right that I'd cost her Ethan and the life she'd planned. Right that the scandal would follow her. But she was wrong that I'd had a choice between revenge and family. You can't choose family over revenge when family is what you're taking revenge against. And she was wrong that I could have taken the money and disappeared quietly. That would have meant letting them win, letting my mother stay erased, letting Robert Powell continue being lauded as a self-made man, while my mother rotted in an unmarked grave with her name scrubbed from the company she'd built. I couldn't live with that. So I'd chosen this instead. But Maddie's words haunted me. Justice isn't clean. She'd written, echoing something I was only beginning to understand. Truth has casualties. Revelation has collateral damage. 3 days later, I went to visit Harold Chen. He'd moved to hospice the week before, and when I walked into his room, I was shocked by how much he'd deteriorated. He was skeletal now, his skin papery and yellow oxygen tubes in his nose, but his eyes were still sharp when he saw me. "Olivia." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sit." I pulled a chair close to his bed and showed him Maddie's letter. He read it slowly, his hands trembling as he held the pages. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me. "Was I right to do it?" I asked. "To blow up the wedding, to destroy Maddie's life along with my father's?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, his breathing labored. Finally he spoke. "Right and wrong aren't the question. Those are words for people who want simple answers. The question is, can you live with what you did? I don't know yet." "Then let me ask you this. Could you have lived with the alternative? Taking the money, walking away, watching your father continue to be celebrated as a pillar of the community while your mother stayed buried and forgotten?" I thought about it honestly. "No, I couldn't have lived with that." "Then you made the only choice you could make." He coughed, and I helped him take a sip of water. "Justice isn't clean, Olivia. It's messy and complicated, and it hurts innocent people sometimes. Maddie is right, she didn't deserve what happened to her, but you didn't deserve what happened to you either. And your mother didn't deserve to be murdered and erased." He paused, catching his breath. "Your mother knew that. That's why she gave you the choice. She didn't leave those documents for you to find at 18 or 20 or 25. She waited until you were 35 because she wanted you to be old enough, strong enough, independent enough to decide if knowing the truth was worth the cost. She knew there would be a cost. She just trusted you to decide if you could bear it." I felt tears start, the first I'd cried since the wedding. "Maddie thinks I chose revenge over family. You chose truth over comfortable lies. There's a difference." Harold reached for my hand with his frail one. "Maddie will have to decide if she can live with the truth about her parents. That's her journey now, not yours. You've done what you needed to do. The question is, what comes next?" I stayed with Harold for another hour, mostly in silence. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but when he was awake, he seemed peaceful. When I left, I kissed his forehead. "Thank you for keeping your promise to my mother." "It was an honor," he whispered. Harold Chen died 4 days later. I went to his funeral and sat in the back row, watching his family and colleagues celebrate a man who'd kept a secret for 34 years because he'd made a promise to a dying woman. Dorothy Martinez was there too. She'd flown back from Arizona for the service. We stood together at the reception afterward, two women who'd been brought together by an old crime and a delayed truth. "Do you regret it?" Dorothy asked me. Coming forward, I thought about Maddie's letter, about the wedding I'd destroyed, about the family I'd torn apart. "No," I said. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it." "Good. Neither do I." The weeks passed. I didn't respond to Maddie's letter. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. She needed to be angry at me. She needed someone to blame who wasn't her parents, because accepting that they were the real villains would shatter what was left of her foundation. I understood that. I didn't like it, but I understood it. I thought about her letter often, though. About the line that had cut deepest, "Absolutely no one who loves you." She was wrong about that. Harold had loved me in his way enough to keep a promise for 34 years. Dorothy loved me enough to risk her reputation and her peace. My mother had loved me enough to plan for my protection even in death. But Maddie was right that I was alone in a way I'd never been before. I'd burned every bridge to the family I'd grown up in. I had money now, freedom, vindication. I just didn't have anyone to share it with. 2 months after the settlement finalized, on a cold day in February, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Postmarked from Stamford, Connecticut. I opened it carefully, half expecting another letter from Maddie. Instead, I found a photo album I'd never seen before. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before, bound in forest green leather, with brass corners, the kind of album people made before everything became digital. The pages were thick, protective sheets covering photographs that had been carefully preserved for decades. I carried it to my couch and opened it slowly. The first photograph took my breath away. It was my mother, but not the mother I remembered from the few formal family portraits that had survived in the Powell household. This was Maria at maybe 22 or 23, wearing jeans and a MIT sweatshirt, sitting on the steps of what looked like a university building with 3 other young women. They were all laughing at something off-camera, their faces bright with the unselfconscious joy of people who believed the future was theirs to build. I turned the page. Maria at her engineering graduation, wearing her cap and gown, holding her diploma with both hands like a trophy. Her smile was enormous, proud, completely unguarded. Behind her I could see other graduates and families, but she was clearly the center of the frame, the focal point. The next page showed her at what must have been Powell Industries' founding celebration. She was standing next to Robert. This was before I was born, before whatever darkness came later. They were both young, both excited, cutting a ribbon in front of a small office building. But what struck me was that Maria wasn't standing behind Robert or beside him as decoration. She was holding one end of the ribbon while he held the other, equals, in the moment, partners in the truest sense. More photos followed. Maria at conferences, presenting to rooms full of men in suits, her posture confident and commanding. Maria receiving an award from some engineering association, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. Maria in a laboratory, safety goggles on, holding up what looked like a circuit board with obvious pride. These weren't the sad, stiff, formal photos I'd found in the Powell house, the ones where Maria looked diminished and tired. These were images of a woman with agency, with power, with a life she'd built through her own brilliance. I found a photo of her holding a baby me, presumably, though I was too young to remember. She was looking down at infant me with such complete love and wonder that I had to stop and wipe my eyes. Tucked into the back of the album was an envelope. Inside, a letter on the same cream stationery Maddie had used, but the handwriting was different, shakier, older. Dear Olivia, I am Diane Chen Martinez, your mother's sister and the aunt who gave you the wooden box when you were 10. I've been following the news about your family, and I wanted you to know I waited until everything was resolved to send this. I didn't want Robert to have any reason to come after me or try to take these photos before you could see them. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Your mother was brilliant, Olivia. She graduated top of her class at MIT when there were hardly any women in engineering. She co-founded Powell Industries and designed half of their early patents. She was strong and funny and absolutely refused to be diminished by anyone. When she married Robert, I was worried he was charming, but there was something cold underneath. But she loved him, or thought she did, and she was so excited about building something together. I could picture Diane writing this, choosing each word carefully. When you were born, Maria called me at 2 a.m. from the hospital, crying happy tears. She said, I have a daughter, Diane, a brilliant little girl who's going to change the world. She loved you completely, Olivia. Everything she did after that, the documents, the precautions, the plans she did to protect you and give you the tools to fight back if something happened to her. The letter continued, and I read through tears. I wasn't trying to stop anymore. I couldn't save her. I tried. When I visited that one time when you were 10, I begged her to leave Robert to take you and run. She said she couldn't prove anything yet, that he'd used the courts to take you away from her, that she needed time to gather evidence. She died before she got that time, but she made sure you'd have the truth eventually. I couldn't save her, but I'm glad you found the truth. I'm glad you made them acknowledge her. She would be so proud of you. The letter was signed Aunt Diane with a phone number and an address in Connecticut. I sat with the album for hours, going through each photo multiple times. Slowly, I began to understand something I'd never fully grasped before. My mother wasn't just a victim who died. She was a warrior who fought back in the only way available to her. She'd seen the danger coming, the symptoms, the suspicious circumstances, the way Robert was slowly poisoning her, and she'd known she couldn't stop it directly. She couldn't go to the police without proof they'd actually investigate instead of dismissing her. She couldn't leave without losing me in a custody battle, so she'd done something more strategic. She'd created a time bomb of truth set to detonate decades later, when I was old enough to handle it, independent enough to survive the fallout, strong enough to carry the weight of what she was giving me. The safe deposit box, the lawyer with instructions to wait until I was 35, the carefully preserved documents and diary. These weren't the desperate acts of a dying victim. These were the calculated moves of a brilliant engineer who understood systems and leverage and delayed action. Maria had known she was going to die, but she'd refused to let Robert win. She'd refused to be erased. She'd waged war across 3 decades using me as her weapon, trusting that when the time came, I'd be ready to pull the trigger. I hadn't inherited just money or documents from my mother. I'd inherited her courage, her strategic mind, her absolute refusal to be diminished or forgotten. The realization settled over me like a weight and a gift at the same time. 2 days later, I called the number Aunt Diane had left. An elderly woman answered, her voice warm but cautious. "This is Olivia Powell. You sent me a photo album." "Oh, Olivia." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm so glad you called." "I've been hoping you would." We talked for 2 hours. She told me stories about my mother. I'd never heard her determination to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who dismissed her. Her late-night study sessions in college, the way she'd insisted on equal billing with Robert on every patent they filed together. She knew what she was worth, Diane said. That's what Robert couldn't stand. He wanted a brilliant woman to build his company, but he also wanted her to be grateful and subordinate. When she refused to be either, he found a permanent solution. Before we hung up, Diane said, "I'm 81 years old, Olivia. I don't have much time left. But I'm glad I got to see Robert Powell lose his reputation before I go. That's the justice Maria deserved." The photo album became my most precious possession. I had it professionally preserved, the photos digitized for safekeeping. I put one photo on my desk, Maria, at the Powell Industries founding, holding that ribbon, looking like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was building. I was standing in my kitchen one morning in early March when my phone rang. Harold Chen's daughter. "My father asked me to call you when the time came. He passed away peacefully this morning." I'd known it was coming, but the news still hit hard. "Can I come say goodbye?" "Of course. He'd like that." I drove to the hospice center. They'd moved Harold's body to a private room and given his family time before the funeral home arrived. His daughter let me in and left me alone with him for a few minutes. Harold looked at peace finally. The pain that had etched his face for months was gone. I took his hand, cold now, but I held it anyway. "You kept your promise," I said quietly. 34 years. My mother chose well. I like to think he would have smiled if he could. At his funeral 3 days later, his daughter spoke about his integrity, his dedication to his clients, his refusal to break a promise, no matter how long it took to keep. She mentioned me by name, talked about the trust he'd maintained for over 3 decades, because a dying woman asked him to protect her daughter, and Harold Chen never broke his word. After the service, a man approached me, one of Harold's colleagues from his early years practicing law. "Your mother was smart to choose Harold. He was the stubbornest attorney I ever met. Once he committed to something, nothing could move him. She knew exactly what she needed." Yes, I thought. She did. A week later, I received a postcard from Arizona. Dorothy's handwriting, large and shaky, but still legible. "Dear Olivia, I'm settled in with my daughter now. The sunshine is lovely, and the grandchildren are loud but wonderful. I wanted you to know I can finally sleep at night. For 34 years, I went to bed knowing I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken. That weight is gone now. Thank you for giving me the chance to tell the truth. Be well. Dorothy." I put the postcard on my refrigerator next to a photo of my mother. The people who'd helped me, Harold, Dorothy, even Aunt Diane in her small way, had gotten their own closure. Harold had kept his promise and died at peace. Dorothy had spoken her truth and could sleep soundly. Diane had seen her sister acknowledged and avenged before her own time ran out. The circle was closing. The debts were being paid. The story was finding its ending. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email. The Women in Business Leadership Conference was inviting me to speak on a panel about overcoming industry challenges and fighting for recognition. They'd seen the coverage of my mother's story. They wanted me to talk about what it meant to reclaim a woman's erased legacy, to fight for acknowledgement in industries that preferred to forget inconvenient truths. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be the face of this story. But then I thought about my mother presenting to rooms full of skeptical men refusing to be diminished. I thought about Dorothy standing up at the wedding despite being terrified. I thought about Harold keeping his promise for decades, even when it would have been easier to forget. I accepted. The conference was held at a downtown hotel in late June. 300 attendees, mostly women in business and technology, ranging from recent graduates to executives in their 60s and 70s. I sat on a panel with 4 other women, all of whom had fought various battles for recognition in their fields. When it was my turn to speak, I told my mother's story. Not the whole thing that would have taken hours, but the core of it. A brilliant woman erased from the company she built. A daughter who found the truth decades later. A fight for acknowledgement that cost everything but was worth it anyway. The audience was silent, attentive. When I finished, the applause was warm and sustained. During the Q&A, a young woman asked, "Do you regret the cost? Losing your family, destroying your sister's wedding?" I'd thought about this question a lot since Maddie's letter. "I regret that it was necessary," I said carefully. "I regret that telling the truth required destruction, but I don't regret telling it. My mother deserved to be remembered. She deserved to have her name on the company she built. That was worth fighting for." After the panel, I stayed for the networking reception. Women approached me with their own stories, mothers whose contributions were credited to fathers, wives whose ideas were claimed by husbands, researchers whose work was published under male supervisors' names. I was talking with a group of engineers when I glanced across the room and froze. Ethan Wright was standing near the bar watching me. Ethan looked different than he had at the wedding. Thinner maybe, or just tired. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring. He raised his glass slightly when he saw me notice him, then made his way through the crowd toward me. The women I'd been talking with sensed the shift in my attention and politely drifted away, giving us space. "Olivia," he said when he reached me, "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." "I'm not sure either," I admitted. "What are you doing here?" "My company sponsors this conference. We have a table in the exhibit hall." He gestured vaguely toward the other room. "I saw your name on the speaker list. I wanted to hear what you had to say." And it was powerful. Your mother deserved to be remembered the way you described her, as a builder, an innovator, not just as a victim. He paused. "I heard about the scholarship. That's a good thing you're doing." The Maria Powell Scholarship had been my idea 3 months after the settlement finalized. I'd donated $2.5 million to establish an endowment that would fund full scholarships for women studying engineering, with preference given to first-generation college students. The first cohort of 5 scholars had been selected last month. It had transformed my mother's story from private tragedy into public legacy. The scholarship website included her photo, the one from the founding celebration where she looked powerful and proud, and a brief biography that acknowledged her as co-founder of Powell Industries and pioneering engineer. "The scholarship isn't about me," I said. "It's about making sure other women don't get erased the way she was." "I know, but it still took courage to create it, to make this public. A lot of people would have taken the money and disappeared." I studied him, trying to figure out why he was really here. "How's Maddie?" His expression tightened. "I don't know. We haven't spoken in 4 months. The engagement is off, permanently." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You were right, I deserved to know the truth before legally binding myself to that family." He took a sip of his drink. "I've been in therapy, trying to process how I enabled what happened, how I knew something was wrong but didn't want to risk my comfort to investigate further." "That's not your fault." "It is, though, at least partially. I had information and resources, and I chose caution over courage. You didn't have that luxury." He set his glass down on a nearby table. "I wanted to apologize again for not being stronger when you needed an ally. And I wanted to ask, would you have coffee with me sometime? Not as anything romantic. Just as 2 people who survived something difficult together and might understand each other." I considered this. Ethan had failed me when I'd needed public support, but he'd also given me the tools to fight my own battle. He'd been honest about his limitations, and he was trying to do better now. "Maybe," I said. "But I need you to understand something first. If we're going to be friends, it has to be as equals. I don't need your guilt or your protection or your redemption arc. I don't exist to make you feel better about the choices you made." Something that might have been respect crossed his face. "Fair enough. And I don't want to talk about the Powells or the wedding or any of it unless I bring it up first. That's not going to be the foundation of whatever this is." "Agreed." We exchanged phone numbers. He promised to text me later in the week about coffee. The conversation was brief, cordial, and carefully boundaried, exactly what it needed to be. After he left, I stayed at the reception for another hour, talking with conference attendees, exchanging business cards, listening to other women's stories of fighting for recognition in industries that preferred to forget them. By the time I got home, it was after 9. I kicked off my heels, changed into comfortable clothes, and was making tea when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. No, that's wrong. I'm saving that for the cliffhanger. Let me continue with Robert's current state first. Over the months since the settlement, I'd pieced together Robert's current situation through various channels. I didn't seek the information out. I'd blocked the Powells on social media and avoided searching their names, but people told me things anyway. Former colleagues who wanted me to know. Ethan, who still had connections to the business community. Even James Ortega's continued reporting. Robert still ran Powell Industries. He hadn't lost the company, the settlement ensured that. But the company was struggling in ways it hadn't before. 3 major clients had dropped their contracts, citing concerns about leadership and company values. The corporate culture article that had praised Powell Industries as a family-friendly workplace was quietly removed from the company website. Recruitment of top engineering talent had become more difficult. Several candidates had apparently asked pointed questions about Maria Powell during interviews. He'd been forced to resign from every board he'd served on. The Philanthropic Foundation, the Hospital Board, the Arts Council, the Business Development Alliance, all of them had accepted his voluntary resignation with carefully worded statements thanking him for his past service. The city's social calendar had effectively closed to him. He and Helen weren't invited to the spring charity gala, the summer garden party, at the Wright Estate, the fall fundraiser for the symphony. The same circles that had celebrated them for decades now found reasons to exclude them. Through a mutual acquaintance, I'd heard that Robert and Helen still lived in the same house but barely spoke to each other. Helen apparently spent most of her time at their second home in Vermont, while Robert stayed in the city for work. Their marriage had become a cold arrangement of shared space and separate lives. Maddie had moved to Seattle 6 months after the wedding. She'd changed her last name legally, not back to her maiden name, but to her maternal grandmother's maiden name, Chen. The same name as my mother. I didn't know what to make of that, whether it was an attempt to distance herself from Robert or to claim connection to the legacy I'd reclaimed. Either way, she'd posted on social media once visible before I blocked her, starting fresh. No more Powell. Robert hadn't lost everything. He still had his company, his house, his wealth. But he'd lost what had mattered to him most, his carefully constructed reputation as a self-made man, a devoted father, a pillar of the community. Every introduction of him now came with a caveat, a whisper, a question mark. I felt no satisfaction from this, but I also felt no guilt. I hadn't caused his downfall. I'd simply stopped enabling the lie he'd built his life on. The consequences were his to live with, not mine to carry. I was thinking about all of this, about how strange it was that truth could be both vindication and burden, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, instinct, curiosity, the sense that unfinished business was calling, made me answer. Hello. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 6 months. Olivia, it's your father. My hand tightened on the phone. I should have hung up immediately. I owed him nothing. No conversation, no closure, no final confrontation. But I found myself staying on the line, waiting. I know you don't want to hear from me. Robert continued, his voice different than I remembered. Older. Tired. The commanding tone that had defined every interaction I'd had with him was gone, replaced by something almost tentative. But I needed to say something. You have 2 minutes. Did you get what you wanted? Not accusatory, just genuinely asking. The money, the public acknowledgement, the destruction of everything I built. Was it enough? You didn't build everything. Maria built half of it. That's the point. I know. A pause. I read the scholarship description. The biography you wrote about her. You made her sound like a hero. She was a hero. She fought back against you the only way she could. Another pause, longer this time. I heard him breathing, gathering whatever he wanted to say next. I didn't call to argue. I called to tell you something you deserve to know. His voice dropped lower. Your mother loved you very much. That part was real. Whatever else I did, whatever lies I told, that wasn't one of them. She loved you more than anything." I felt my throat tighten but kept my voice steady. "I know she did. That's why she made sure I'd have the tools to fight you after she was gone." "Yes." He said it simply, almost with respect. "She was smarter than I gave her credit for. Smarter than me in the end." "In the beginning, too." "Probably." I heard what might have been a bitter laugh. "The scholarship is a good thing, Olivia. She would have liked that." "Don't tell me what my mother would have liked. You don't get to speak for her anymore." "You're right. I don't." Another long pause. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know that's not something I can have. I'm just telling you what you did, reclaiming her name, making sure she's remembered. That was the right thing. Even though it destroyed me, it was right." I didn't know what to say to that. An admission of wrongdoing wrapped in self-pity delivered too late to matter. "Are you dying?" I asked bluntly. "What? Is that why you're calling deathbed confession clearing your conscience before you go?" "No, I'm not dying, I just—" He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I'm alone, Olivia. Helen barely speaks to me. Maddie changed her name and moved across the country. The company is failing. Everyone I thought was a friend has disappeared, and I realized I destroyed everything that mattered chasing a reputation that was built on lies." "Good," I said. Not cruelly, just factually. "You should feel the consequences of what you did." "I do. Every day." "That's not my problem." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just telling you won. Completely. Whatever you wanted to accomplish, you did it." "I didn't want to win," I said, surprised by the truth of it. "I wanted the truth to be told and my mother to be remembered. Destroying you was just a side effect." "But you're satisfied now. You can move forward." Was I thought about the scholarship, about the conference speech, about the photo album Aunt Diane had sent, about Dorothy sleeping peacefully, and Harold dying with his promise kept, and my mother's name restored to the company she built. "Yes," I said. "I can move forward." "Good. That's good." He cleared his throat. "I won't call again. I just needed you to know that I understand what you did and why, and that your mother loved you. Those are true things, and I owed you the truth at least once. You owe me more than that. You owe me 36 years of honesty, but I'm not interested in collecting that debt anymore." "I understand." Neither of us said goodbye. He just hung up, and I was left standing in my kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. I set the phone down, finished making my tea, and sat at my kitchen table with the photo album open to the picture of my mother at the founding celebration. I'd won. He was right about that. But winning felt quieter than I'd imagined, more like relief than triumph. The fight was over. The truth was told. My mother was remembered. Now I had to figure out what came next in a life that was finally completely my own. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after Robert hung up the phone, still in my hand, my tea growing cold on the counter. The conversation replayed in my mind. His admission that I'd won, his acknowledgement that my mother loved me, his confession that he was alone and destroyed. I'd expected to feel something, satisfaction, vindication, maybe even pity. Instead, I felt nothing except a quiet sense of completion. A door closing that had been left ajar for too long. Robert had asked if I'd gotten what I wanted, and I'd told him I'd gotten what I needed. But sitting there in the silence after his call, I understood the difference more clearly than I ever had before. What I'd wanted was impossible, a mother who hadn't been murdered, a childhood where I wasn't erased, a family that loved me unconditionally. What I'd needed was truth acknowledgement and the power to stop the lies from continuing. I'd gotten what I needed. The wanting would always hurt, but it didn't control me anymore. I picked up my phone and texted Ethan, "Coffee this weekend, usual place." His response came back within minutes. "Saturday 10 a.m. See you there." Small steps forward, new connections built on honesty instead of obligation. The months passed. I met Ethan for coffee, and we talked about everything except the Powells, his work, my scholarship foundation, the books we were reading, the city's changing landscape. It was surprisingly easy once we'd established that our friendship wasn't defined by trauma. I hired a small staff for the Maria Powell Foundation, a director, an administrator, and a part-time grants manager. The scholarship program expanded. By fall, we'd awarded 15 full scholarships to women studying engineering, computer science, and mathematics. Each recipient received a letter with their acceptance that included a photo of Maria and a brief biography. I wanted them to know whose legacy they were carrying forward. Dorothy and I exchanged emails regularly. She sent photos of her grandchildren, updates about her health stable, but declining slowly, and occasional memories of my mother that she'd remembered. I sent her updates about the foundation and photos from the events we held. Aunt Diane and I spoke on the phone once a month. She was in her 80s and increasingly frail, but her mind was sharp and her memories of Maria were vivid. She told me stories I'd never heard about Maria's determination as a young woman, her refusal to accept limitations, her joy when she'd gotten pregnant with me. She used to talk about all the things she'd teach you, Diane said during one call. How to negotiate for what you're worth, how to stand up to people who try to diminish you, how to build things that last. I think she'd be proud to see you doing exactly that. Christmas arrived again. 1 year exactly since the phone call that had excluded me from my family's celebration, since the chain of events that had led to everything that followed. This year, I spent Christmas Eve at the community space we'd created for the Maria Powell Foundation. Harold Chen's former law office had been converted into a small gathering place, meeting rooms for mentoring sessions, a library of engineering texts and biographies of women in STEM, and a large common room that we used for events. I'd invited the scholarship recipients, their families. Dorothy's daughter, Dorothy herself, was too ill to travel. Aunt Diane, Ethan, and a few of the women I'd met through the speaking circuit, who'd become genuine friends. It wasn't lavish. We had a potluck dinner, simple decorations, a small Christmas tree in the corner that one of the scholarship recipients had insisted on bringing. But when I looked around the room at these people, none of them related to me by blood, all of them connected to me by choice and shared experience. I felt something I'd never felt at any Powell family gathering. I felt like I belonged. One of the scholarship recipients, a young woman named Keisha, who was studying mechanical engineering, approached me as I was refilling the punch bowl. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said hesitantly. "Of course. Are you lonely? Without your original family, I mean. Everyone talks about how you gave up everything to tell the truth about your mom. Do you ever regret it?" I thought about how to answer honestly without burdening her with the complexity of it all. "Family isn't who you're born to," I said finally. "It's who shows up when it matters. My blood relatives excluded me, erased me, made me feel like I didn't deserve space in their lives. These people," I gestured around the room, "they showed up, they believed me, they helped me when I needed help and celebrated with me when I succeeded. I have more family now than I ever did before." Keisha nodded, slowly processing. "My parents didn't want me to accept this scholarship. They said it was built on scandal and I should stay away from controversy. But I researched your mom and she was brilliant. She deserved to be remembered." "What made you accept despite your parents' concerns?" "Because I'm not going to erase myself to make other people comfortable. Your mom didn't, and you didn't. That's the legacy I want to carry forward." I had to turn away for a moment, blinking back tears. The party continued until almost midnight. When everyone had left and I was alone in the space, I walked around, turning off lights and picking up stray cups and plates. I stopped in front of the photograph we'd hung on the wall, Maria at the Powell Industries founding, looking powerful and proud. "We did it, Mom," I whispered. "They tried to erase you, but you're here. You're remembered. You won." I drove home through empty streets, Christmas lights blinking in windows, snow beginning to fall lightly. My apartment was dark when I arrived, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, and settled on my couch with my laptop. I had an email I'd been meaning to respond to for several days. The sender was a woman named Alexandra Chen. No relation to my mother, just a coincidence of common names. She'd found me through the foundation website and the articles about my mother's story. Her email had been brief, but painfully familiar. "Dear Ms. Powell, I don't know if you respond to messages like this, but I'm hoping you might have advice. My father is a prominent surgeon who built his practice with my mother's support and money, but when she died 5 years ago, he remarried within months and has been systematically writing her out of the family story. My stepmother tells people she's the only wife he ever had. At family gatherings, my mother's photos have been removed and replaced. When I bring her up, I'm told I'm living in the past and need to move forward. I'm starting to feel like I'm going crazy, like maybe I'm the problem. Did you ever feel like that? How did you find the strength to fight back when everyone was telling you that you were wrong? I opened a reply and began typing. Dear Alexandra, yes, I felt exactly like that. For most of my life, actually. The people who erase our mothers count on us doubting ourselves, on us believing that we're the problem rather than the system that benefits from their erasure. Here's what I learned. I wrote for an hour, sharing not specific tactics but principles. Document everything. Find witnesses. Choose your battles strategically. Accept that truth-telling has costs, but silence has costs too. Build a support system outside the family that's failing you. I ended with, the fight doesn't end with my story or with yours. There are daughters everywhere being asked to erase their mothers, to stay silent about injustice, to prioritize family harmony over truth. Each one of us who refuses makes it a little easier for the next woman to refuse too. You're not crazy, you're not the problem, and you're not alone. If you decide to fight back, know that it's possible to win, and that winning doesn't look like what you think it will. It looks like freedom. It looks like being able to sleep at night knowing you didn't betray yourself or the mother who loved you. Reach out anytime you need support. Olivia. I read it over once, then hit send. The email whooshed away into the digital void, carrying my words to a woman I'd never met, but whose pain I understood completely. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the snow falling more heavily now, coating the city in white. Somewhere out there, Robert Powell was probably alone in his big house, surrounded by wealth but isolated from the community that used to celebrate him. Helen was probably at the Vermont house, maintaining the fiction of a marriage that had died years ago. Maddie was in Seattle, trying to build an identity separate from the family name she'd abandoned. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't forgive them either. They'd simply become people I used to know, characters in a story that was no longer actively being written. What I felt instead was something quieter and more powerful. I felt free. Free from the need for their approval, free from the shame they'd projected onto me, free from the lie that blood relation equals love. Free to build my own family from people who chose to show up. Free to honor my mother's memory in ways that mattered. Free to help other daughters fight their own battles against erasure. I returned to the couch and opened the photo album to my favorite picture, Maria holding me as an infant, looking down at me with pure love and wonder. I traced the edge of the photo gently. Thank you, I whispered, for loving me enough to fight back, for trusting me to finish what you started, for refusing to be erased. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional sound of cars passing on the snowy street below. I felt my mother's presence not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation, something solid I'd built my new life upon. Tomorrow I'd wake up and continue the work. I'd respond to more emails from daughters fighting their own battles. I'd review applications for next year's scholarship cohort. I'd have coffee with Ethan and maybe lunch with one of the foundation board members. I'd live my life fully and freely, owing no one my silence, carrying no one's shame. But tonight I simply sat with the photo album and let myself feel the peace of having done what needed to be done. Some people measure success by money, some by power, some by titles or recognition or the size of their social circle. Olivia Powell measured success by the ability to sleep soundly each night, knowing she owed no one her silence. That was my story. The story of how I reclaimed my mother's legacy, exposed my family's lies, and built a life on truth instead of silence. It's been 2 years since that Christmas when everything changed. 2 years since I walked into my sister's wedding and detonated a truth bomb that destroyed a carefully constructed empire of lies. People often ask me if I regret it, if the cost was too high, if I wish I'd just taken the money and disappeared quietly into a comfortable life of willful ignorance. The answer is always the same: no. Because here's what I learned through all of this, and it's a lesson that took me 36 years and a mother's posthumous guidance to understand fully. Silence has a price too. It costs you your integrity. It costs you your self-respect. It costs you the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. My family wanted me to pay that price so they could keep their comfortable lies intact. I refused. Robert Powell still runs Powell Industries, but it's a shell of what it once was. Last I heard, the company had lost 60% of its major contracts and was being kept alive primarily through legacy relationships that were slowly dying off as older clients retired. He no longer appears on any charitable boards or at society events. His name, when it comes up in business circles, is always followed by a pause and then a careful change of subject. He didn't go to prison. He didn't lose his wealth. But he lost something far more valuable to a man like him. He lost the respect and admiration he'd spent decades cultivating. That's a life sentence of its own kind. Helen lives primarily at their Vermont property now. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's become something of a recluse, rarely venturing into the city, avoiding any situation where she might encounter the people who used to celebrate her as a philanthropic maven. The woman who once controlled narratives with surgical precision now can't control her own story. That's poetic justice in its purest form. Maddie lives in Seattle under her maternal grandmother's maiden name. We haven't spoken since her letter, and I don't expect we ever will. I hope she's found some peace, some way to build an identity separate from the toxic foundation she was raised on. She was a victim too in her way, though she'll probably never see it that way. She lost a wedding, an engagement, and the fairy tale life she'd been promised. What she gained, if she chooses to claim it, is the opportunity to build something real instead of something beautiful but false. Whether she takes that opportunity isn't my responsibility. As for me, the Maria Powell Foundation continues to grow. We've expanded beyond scholarships to include mentorship programs, research grants, and advocacy work for women in STEM fields who face erasure or discrimination. Last month, we helped a woman scientist get proper credit for a patent her male supervisor had tried to claim. Next month, we're funding a documentary about women engineers whose contributions were systematically attributed to male colleagues. My mother's story has become a catalyst for countless other women to reclaim their own narratives. I think about my mother often, not with the desperate grief of someone who never knew her, but with the deep appreciation of someone who finally understands her. Maria Chen Powell was a warrior who fought a war across decades using her daughter as her weapon because she knew I'd eventually be strong enough to wield the truth effectively. She wasn't just a victim who died. She was a strategist who ensured that her murderer's victory would be temporary and that her daughter would have the tools to finish what she started. The greatest gift she gave me wasn't the documents or the money or even the truth. It was the example of refusing to be erased, of fighting back, even when the odds were impossible, of believing that truth matters more than comfort. I carry that gift with me every day. I've learned something profound through this journey, something I want to share with anyone listening who might be facing their own version of my story. Family is not defined by blood. It's not defined by obligation or tradition or the accident of being born into a particular household. Real family is defined by who shows up when it matters, who believes you when others call you crazy, who stands beside you when standing beside you costs them something. I have more family now than I ever did in the Powell household. I have the scholarship recipients who write to me about their dreams and struggles. I have the women who've contacted me with their own stories of erasure and who I've been privileged to help. I have Ethan, who learned from his own failures and became a genuine friend. I have Aunt Diane, who's still alive at 83 and sends me recipes and memories of my mother. I have a community built on truth and choice rather than obligation and lies. If you're watching this and you're carrying a secret that isn't yours to keep, if you're being asked to erase someone you love to protect someone you don't, if you're living in a family that demands your silence as the price of belonging, please know this: you have a choice. The choice is hard. The cost is real. But the alternative, living as a ghost in your own life, betraying yourself and the people who loved you, that cost is higher. Truth-telling is not the same as revenge. Revenge is about destruction for its own sake. Truth-telling is about refusing to participate in a lie even when participation would be easier, even when it would be more comfortable, even when everyone around you is invested in maintaining the fiction. Some of you watching this might think I'm bitter or vindictive. You might think I should have forgiven my family and moved on. But forgiveness without accountability is just enabling. And moving on doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means learning from it, growing from it, and building something better because of it. I want to know what you think. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal truth? Have you watched someone you love be erased from a family narrative? Have you carried a secret that wasn't yours to keep? Share your stories in the comments below. You don't have to use real names. You don't have to give details that could identify you. But if you've lived through something similar, know that you're not alone, and your story matters. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about truth and family, and the cost of silence, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you'll know when we share more stories about people who chose courage over comfort. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's being asked to stay silent. Someone who's wondering if their truth is worth fighting for. Because here's the final lesson. The one that took me longest to learn: your truth is always worth fighting for. Not because fighting is noble or heroic, but because the alternative is spending your life as a supporting character in someone else's lie. You deserve to be the main character of your own story. You deserve to live in truth, even when truth is hard. My mother couldn't live her full story. It was cut short by violence and lies. But she made sure I could live mine, and that I could help others live theirs too. That's the real victory. Not that Robert Powell lost his reputation, but that Maria Chen Powell's legacy is growing stronger every year, helping women who never met her, but who carry forward the same refusal to be diminished. Sleep soundly tonight, knowing you owe no one your silence. That's freedom. That's justice. That's how you win.